Hello and welcome to TYT Community Live here on the Young Turks Network, TYTnetwork.com. I am your host, Jeff Waldorf, today, joining you today from the new studio, which I'm in right now. As you can see, brick wall, looking pretty nice. It may or may not be a real wall, but I will leave that up to you to guess. So, got a really good show for you tonight. I've got Dan Spearin from Truth Mashup joining us tonight, and of course Jordan joining us from his truck. Welcome, guys.
Hey, man. Thanks for having us.
Are we all together?
Yeah, we're
there
all
we
together.
go.
Good to see you guys. Of course, we have to do the customary ISIS scare story. Good news story. There's actually a good news story for once, and then Ebola. So we're going to bring it up, and then we're going to bring it back down. We're going to nosedive it and crash it right into the fucking ground, because that's what we do here. You get your hopes up, and then we smash them horribly. Then we're going to take apart a strange GOP ad from their outreach on women, and talk about the decapitation virus. You thought Ebola was bad. Wait till you hear about the decapitation virus. Brian Fisher's got that covered. So we're going to talk about that. So I guess we're going to get started here with the first story of the night. But before I do that, actually, we're going to have a little bit of a Q&A session at the end of the show. So think of your questions and let us know. Send them in the chat. Do whatever. Get your questions. We'll answer them. Dan, Jordan, and I will get that done, and we'll set this whole thing in motion now. As in now. There it is. Technology. Technology. What your money pays for, guys. A new UN report on the Islamic State shows a horrifying reality for those, for the people that are caught up in it. In this report, the UN states that Islamic State insurgents in Iraq have carried out mass executions, abducted women and girls as sex slaves, and even used child soldiers in what may be amount to systematic war crimes that demand prosecution. Wow. That's, wow. Okay, so what about the death toll? They've been killing a lot of people, right? Mass executions. Well, how many people have been killed? Almost 10,000 people, 9,347 civilians have been killed, and nearly 20,000 wounded so far this year through September. Well over half of them since the Islamist insurgents known as ISIS began seizing large parts of Iraq early in June. So that's a lot of people. That's a lot of people. And look, some of the reports allege that some of these mass executions are just, they line people up in front of a mass grave and just machine gun them down. Most likely with our guns, if that makes you feel any better. Now the report continues. The array of violations and abuses perpetrated by ISIS and associated armed groups is staggering. Well, no shit. And many of their acts amount to war crimes or crimes against humanity. And this is according to the High Commissioner for Human Rights, Zaid Ra'al al-Hussein. Now, these violations, what exactly are these violations? I'm going to get into detail about that. Now, these violations include attacks directly targeting civilians and civilian infrastructure, executions and other targeted killings of civilians, abductions, rape, and other form of sexual and physical violence perpetrated against women and children, forced recruitment of children, destruction or violation or desecration of places of religious or cultural significance, wanton destruction and looting of property, as well as denial of fundamental freedoms. Okay, so none of this really should come as a surprise to any of you watching. We already know that ISIS and ISIL They're just a terrible group of shitty people. And that's obviously why we're bombing them, right? Right? Well, speaking of bombing, this report actually mentioned civilian deaths from our bombing to fight them. And this was reported in Reuters. In a report based on 500 interviews with witnesses, Iraqi government and allied airstrikes, yes, that would be us, on the Sunni Muslim militants have caused significant civilian deaths. Now, I don't have a number on that, but significant. I don't know what you might consider significant, 100, 200, 5,000, 3,000, whatever. And that's because we've hit villages, schools, and hospitals in violation of international law. So us and our allies have been hitting civilian targets as well, and so is ISIS. So you've got, you've got innocent people, civilians, stuck in the middle of basically us and ISIS. So we're bombing, they're intentionally bombing the shit out of civilians, and we're just kind of making it worse with our own bombs. I don't see any good part about this situation. I don't see any light on the horizon. This is depressing as fuck. Dan, say something to cheer me up. Come on.
Well, that's the equivalent of going on after a terrible, as a comedian, is going on after like a terrible news event has been. Oh, by the way, Bob, all of you love him, passed away tonight, and here's your next comedian. So yeah, let me try to follow UN report about that. I think from the larger point here that I think that we have to be sort of concerned about is that it kind of comes back to I don't think people have a grasp of what's going on in that situation. So this doesn't really change a whole lot in the grand scheme of things because we knew a civil war was happening over there, and we knew that what had happened had a lot to do with the clusterfuck that was the 2003 situation. So the problem that I have with this report is how the context of the media is actually reporting on it, because what's reporting on is the raw numbers without the context, without explaining anything, and it just feeds into the ISIS is this giant growing threat that's snowballing down a hill and that we have to go to war again. And of course, for people like me in Canada, where we have people in power that wanted to go in the first place but didn't in Iraq, this is starting to get concerning in my country as well, because they're all set to keep feeding the beast of fear with ISIL. Now, I think that the bottom line comes back to, do you understand what that situation is? We had a reporter here in Canada ask the leader of the opposition what this situation had to do with 2003 in Iraq, when he dared to suggest that we were going down the same road again and having problems. And you have to ask the question, yes, is this evil? Yes. What are the steps to do anything about it, and will those steps once again create the same problem? In 2003, you could make a case with numbers and all these things of what was happening with Saddam Hussein, and what he had done was bad. But now we're 10 years later, and we have this problem because of that problem. And that's the real question, I think, that the media is not really putting into context for people. But 17,000 civilians in Iraq have been wounded over the same period that this 9,300 have been hurt. But there are no specific numbers. We don't know the specifics of how people died. It's a bloody mess. But how can the West do or not do anything, and what's the consequences of that? So it's still the same debate. Unfortunately, it's not on cable news. It's just feeding the beast.
Go ahead, Jordan. I see you're trying to weigh in.
Those were some really good points from Dan. I don't know how much more I could really contribute meaningfully. So I'll just try to maybe build on what he said and kind of expound on it. But so yeah, what he said about it being the way the media reports it is brilliant, because what actually happened here is that 10,000 more people have been added to the death toll in Syria and Iraq. That's happened, or that have been added to the 600,000 dead Iraqis and now Syrians that have invaded in 2003. That's what happened. It's not that ISIS killed 10,000 people. I mean, they did. I know we got there. I know missionaries in Turkey who are on the border of it. Like I get this is a bad situation. I don't want to belittle that. But what I'm saying is this is 10,000 more dead Arabs tacked onto the roughly 600,000 or so that have died as a consequence of our illegal, unconstitutional, based on lies. And it's being treated like it's this completely nebulous occurrence, and that this is some new problem that we've got to go solve, and look how evil these people are. They've killed 10,000 people. We didn't really care about the 600,000 that died before them as a result of the exact same thing that these deaths are a result of. But all of a sudden now, because our involvement in the war over there wrapped up, it gets treated like it's this whole new nebulous thing, and it's used to drum up more support for another war. And I get it. I know. I get.
Whoops, I think he exploded. Okay, so wait.
Well, I don't know.
Wait, I think he's coming back.
He's alive.
Let's let this, folks. Okay, do it live.
Hey, I'm sorry about that. I'm back. What was the last thing that you guys heard from me?
You got halfway through your point about trying to see that people don't see what's going on in the Middle East as an extension of 2003.
Okay. Yes. All right. Thanks, Dan. So yeah. So because of that, because we're buying into this false narrative that we're saying we're only having the debate from the context of, hey, these people are evil, because they are. They're doing horrible things. Killing 10,000 people is a horrible, horrible thing, and they're going to kill thousands more. So we're having that debate rather than having the, hey, we broke it, it's pretty bad over there, what should we do, which is a legitimate debate, and some of those same options are on the table in the debate, but the way the data and everything else that informs those options is completely different. If you're honest about, is this ISIS killing 10,000 people, or is this the latest 10,000 people out of 600,000 dead people? And that's a completely different conversation. Even if you're looking at the same options, you're looking at them from a different angle, and that's an important difference.
I think what's really even, just to jump on what Jordan said there from the international standpoint, the reason why you can't tie it back to Iraq and why you see the administration trying to make it sound like a whole new problem is because if you did, all of the countries who somehow magically are now on your side, that becomes a problem, because there's a lot of countries like Canada who were not necessarily interested in that 2003 conflict. So you kind of have to sell their populations on this. It's a new horrible enemy that just sort of existed, because we all in the rest of the world were slapping our foreheads going, what are you going to Iraq for, America, in 2003? And Britain and the States, and even most Brits, I think, now look back at that and go, oops. So the idea of creating a new monster that doesn't have any sort of connection to that's really important to the propaganda war in getting a new war off the ground, because, you know, whether or not it's justified is another question, but for the international community, you definitely need things like today's UN report and not to give full context to that, because that is what will get you a larger coalition.
No, here's the question that I hear a lot, okay, from reporting this whole thing, is that, are you advocating for boots on the ground? No, we're not. We're certainly not. We didn't before, and we're not now. But there's a argument to be made that this stuff does need to be reported. This stuff is important. It's an important, regional conflict that does affect other things, especially since we are now involved. So I think it's important to be able to report objectively. This is the raw numbers. This is what happens, and also tying it in with, this is what happens when we make a mess in the Middle East, right? These are just the facts. It's not like people have to quit making the assumption that all media is there to push a specific narrative, right? A lot of it is, but We are not. We're not trying to push the narrative of, like, when we report something like this, reporting that it's horrible, so that you know what's going on. And I think that's what the mainstream media has really pulled away from, because they're reporting it and saying, look how horrible these people are. Let's get them. You know, we're not trying to do that whole thing. We're saying that these people are horrible. This is what happens when we go in and we break countries. Maybe we shouldn't do that again.
Yeah, and just another reason why another reason why this is so clearly, an intentional manipulation with a desired goal to drum up another war. So 10,000 people have died in a little less than half a year. What was it? The death toll in the Syrian civil war was 100,000 over the course of 2 years, I guess, a year and a half. And thankfully, we didn't get involved there. Now, the reason, not only does that show a hypocrisy on our part, but again, to my earlier point about this being another 10,000 tacked onto the existing total, not a separate incident, we are doing, if we are to engage in war against ISIS, even if it's just the airstrikes or whatever, even if we somehow magically don't put boots on the ground, which we already have, but whatever.
We already have.
Like, this isn't conspiracy theory stuff. You can do your research and find this. So there have been, we all know kind of what happened in Syria. Just a quick refresher. Like, you have a civil war, and then you have a civil war within the civil war where you have moderate groups fighting ISIS, and they're fighting Assad as well. Wes Clark Jr. was awesome to point out on the main show a while back that, like, Assad has not engaged against ISIS. He's only fighting the Free Syrian Army. It's kind of the bannerman for the moderate groups. But not only is it goes farther than that. Not only is Assad not engaging with ISIS, there have been documented battles where the Free Syrian Army and its allies have been engaged in conflict with in combat with ISIS, and it appears that the Free Syrian Army is going to overtake ISIS, and Assad's air force bombs the Free Syrian Army so that ISIS wins the battle. So by us going to war against ISIS, we are keeping Assad in power and keeping all his atrocities going, because he knows that if we're bombing ISIS, he can handle the Free Syrian Army, the one that really poses a threat to him. We're going to handle, and not only that, we're not going to attack him for attacking ISIS. We're basically keeping Assad in power, letting him do all the evil he wants to do, and he's keeping ISIS in power, because as long as he keeps him in power, we keep him in power. And we're playing into so many played out, almost B-movie cliches about drumming up a war and covering up the real reasons we're doing it, and it's really, really discouraging.
I think what's even more interesting, than what Jordan just said is the fact that most people don't know what Jordan just said. Like, they have no clue what's happening, and I think that really plays into how easily the public is manipulated. And what fascinates me about this, if I could step back a la George Carlin and look at the whole planet like a show, is this. This is the first time in recent memory that I can really truly think of the Marshall McLuhan effect happening in reverse, if you will. So if you look at 1991 in Iraq, Hill and Knowlton, who is a PR marketing firm who runs accounts for Pepsi or whatever, runs Citizens for a Free Kuwait. They have Saudi Arabia's ambassador's daughter go in and say that babies in incubators were overturned in Kuwait, and we go back to human atrocity, and that gets the vote to go to war, and then all of a sudden America's at war in the Gulf. This war has come from terrorists, or whatever you want to call that, ISIL, being really good at PR. So it's become the reverse. Now that the terrorists understand that you need a messaging, and that you need a Twitter account, and that you need something flashy, and you need something tight and packaged. So now you've got your enemy doing what you actually paid millions of dollars to do to convince your own public in 1991. Now, a couple decades later, your enemies figured it out. If we can broadcast a message here, if we can do direct targeting, this will get get a real big reaction from the Western world, and they want you to go and rattle that hornet's nest because we can't fix the Middle East. We can't do these things as West. Like John Stewart made a hilarious point of like when before they had the Arab countries around there with the airstrikes, it was like, so, okay, let's look at the who's in the coalition. So we're taking 13 Christian countries into the middle of Muslim territory, and we're going to launch a war, and that's going to go well. And so this is the same problem that we have. So most of the American public, the Canadian public, etc., don't understand what's happening with those regional conflicts. Decade ago, of course, being summarized by the difference between Sunni and Shia is not known by the administration and high up people in the administration, like the president, Donald Rumsfeld. Now, later, you have these situations where we're focused on ISIL and the atrocities, and you just keep building that snowball. As Jordan said, you could throw darts on a map. And there's a lot of places in the world that have that you could do the same snowball with. But when we focus on something, when we buy into ISIL's beheading videos and their propaganda, it just gets growing. And you could do this, like we really could, like wag the dog style. In that film, pick any country out of a hat and then start feeding that beast. But what's so interesting to me is the enemy did it this time. It was their marketing campaign that now a month and a half later, guys, we're all of a sudden talking about, should we have boots on the ground, should we not have? A month and a half ago, they pulled the Democratic Party and they asked them where ISIL was on the list of concerns, and it was under global warming. It's, the numbers are there. I'm not arguing if it's bad or not, but I am arguing the necessity to get the hell over there in a hurry, which I don't see.
Yeah, well, the last thing before we wrap it up is the fact that you guys brought up a really, really good point in the fact that their propaganda and stuff is aimed towards us because they need us. They need us to come over there and to do what we're doing. They need us to do boots on the ground as a recruiting tool. That's the biggest recruiting tool over there in the Middle East is saying, look at we're fighting the great Satan. So you guys need to come over here and help us. Because obviously we're being bombed by America, by the great Satan. So, we need your help. Holy war, jihad. If we didn't do anything, this ISIL would, I'm assuming, in time, would fall in on itself. And, that's of course what Chelsea Manning had said earlier in her op-ed, and I think that she's right on. Without a focus, without a big enemy like America, this group most likely would fracture and run out of steam. But since we're falling into exactly what they want us to do, that's why you get numbers like these. That's why you get 10,000 civilians killed, almost 20,000 wounded. Because we are continuing that cycle of violence in the Middle East by getting involved. And it was created from getting involved, and it's continuing from our involvement. Okay. Starting out on a light note, guys. The trial of Michael Dunn, the 47-year-old Florida man who shot and killed 17-year-old Jordan Davis, is over. Dunn has been found guilty of first-degree murder. Now, back in 2012, Dunn had claimed self-defense after shooting Davis because his music was too loud, and he had asked him to turn it down. Now, Dunn alleges that Davis pointed a shotgun at him, and that Dunn just had to defend himself against the loud music shotgun-wielding 17-year-old. Now, of course, the police had found that there was no gun in Davis's car, in his SUV, and that Dunn had shot at the vehicle about 10 times, even as they were fleeing. 3 of them, of course, hitting and killing Jordan Davis. And this was during the trial. Dunn had told the jury, "I meant to pull it 50 times if that's what it took to save my life. But your life wasn't in danger, but you still would have shot 50 times. Interesting. And that's because, of course, rap music is so incredibly dangerous, guys, right? Now, what's interesting about this whole case is that it was found guilty of first-degree murder. Now, the jury was actually hung on that charge because first degree equals premeditation. And the evidence had to be incredibly damning for a jury to actually adopt that first-degree murder charge. Now, as far as this whole thing, I'm happy to see some justice here, and I really do hope that discourages people in Florida and other states, especially ones that are, have self-defense laws and stand your ground, which wasn't involved in this case, Jordan. Just letting you know, it wasn't involved here, but I think it will make some people who thought about using self-defense cases from being so trigger-happy and maybe thinking about it before they decide to haul off and murder someone over loud music. What do you guys think?
Let me jump in first on this one, partly because it looks like a tornado might be moving through, and I want to get my point in before I die. So this is good. Like, justice was done here. That's good. And I don't know that there's really a whole lot to talk about here, but I do want to point out what to me seems like a really important difference in this particular case and other high-profile shooting, of unarmed black men, whether that was Trayvon Martin or Michael Brown, whatever you want to name it. And the thing here is that, like, we didn't shift the narrative to nonsense. As good as it is to make these things high-profile and to unfortunately, you have to pick out anecdotes of young black men getting killed to point out, that this is a problem in America. Across the board. I don't remember, maybe it's just because I didn't follow this case closely, so if I'm wrong here, whatever, but like, with Trayvon Martin and Michael Brown, like, half the time spent on the news coverage talked about the circumstances of the shooting, and then the other half of the time, if you're on MSNBC, it was talking about what a good kid Michael Brown was. If you're on Fox, it was talking about what a bad kid he was. And the same thing with Trayvon Martin. This case, like, they talked about the shooting. Like, we didn't get sucked into that completely pointless narrative, which just seems like a bait and switch from the right to me, because if you talk about the shooting and you make the issue about the actual issue, I think all three of those cases seem, truth be told, we don't know enough about the Michael Brown, but the Trayvon Martin in this one seem clearly like justice was not done in the case of Trayvon Martin, and justice was done here because of the outcomes. And I don't get, like, why we as liberals feel like we have to do that. Like, we have to make the victims out to be angelic people. Like, you can be an innocent gun victim, and it doesn't matter, if you flipped off a camera or if you have a bit of a rough past or whatever, all these complete, ad hominem attacks that come out. Like, I don't know why we feel we're so easy to get sucked into that, and we didn't do that here. And I don't want to say, like, I'm not trying to attribute and say that's the only reason that justice was done here when it doesn't seem like it wasn't in other places. But I think it's an important detail to not ignore. Like, talk about what actually matters and, like, what's important. And don't worry about the kid's past or whatever. Talk about what happened that day. And if there was injustice done there, then talk about the injustice that was done. And don't open up unnecessary doors to shift the conversation to anything that could poison public opinion, because what the kid did in the past or didn't do in the past doesn't matter. Doesn't matter if he's the best kid in the world or the worst kid in the world. He's an unarmed kid who didn't pose any threat that got shot. That's what you talk about. And I think that's what was done here.
I don't share Jordan's silver lining, only because if this was a television show, David Caruso would have thrown his sunglasses on and the Who would have strummed a guitar in the first 5 minutes of the show. Case dismissed. We're in a commercial. David better find another case to go to because this isn't interesting. And that's, I think, where I don't find too much, solace in that America didn't turn this into another Trayvon Martin. This is impossible to turn it. This is such an open and shut case. Like, this is so unbelievably, like, there's just nothing in this case that you could mildly find to stand up for the guy. Like, there's just nothing. Whether he didn't call 911, like the forensic expert came in and said that the the kid was in the like trying to get away from the bullets, etc. down the line. Like, this was just such an open and shut case that it would honestly, there would be not enough tears in the world that I would be able to find if anyone tried to make this a news, sort of pinata, because there's no other side. And so with Trayvon, with everything else, there were like pieces and problems and like nobody knows what happened kind of thing. And this was just insanity. Somebody's music's playing too loud, bang, 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 bang. And, not to like pivot to a completely other argument that I'm sure this panel could go on all night, but I will say every time eventually somebody uses the strawman argument of, well, people get killed with knives too. Here's an example of where somebody wouldn't have died if it was a knife. These are the kinds of things that happen. People go off kilter, go crazy, and the only weapon that gets you dead from 0 to 60 in a stupid situation like this would be a gun.
Yeah, he could pretty much drive away. He could have drove away if this guy had a knife. If Michael Dunn had a knife, or so.
Yep. Well, and not only am I not going to argue with Dan, but I'm going to completely agree with him, which I'm sure shocks him. But I'm also I want to point out something that is relevant to the story here, like this specific case. These are the Michael Dunn's words. Let me see if I can read it here. Now, I'm quoting from a source I don't particularly care for, so if this is misquoted, I apologize. I meant to pull it 50 times if that's what it took to save my life, he told the Florida jury on Tuesday. I deliberately defended myself. There was nothing accidental about it. And the reason he pulled a gun on this kid is because apparently these black youths moved too quickly and frightened him, and he felt his person was in danger, so he shot them. Like, that's a serious problem. Like, that's indicative of a race problem in America. Like, black kids can't move too fast because if they move fast, they must be carrying guns. Like, if you went to these kids with a preconceived notion, they were listening to gangster rap, therefore that was bad. Like, if these had been white kids busting George Jones just as loud, you probably wouldn't have done this. And you also, even if you did, maybe you genuinely don't want loud music, you wouldn't have gone with your hand ready to go to your carry weapon. But so there's that. But this is also indicative of a big problem in American gun culture, and it's like, it's in American culture in general, but it gets exercised in gun culture because we got the tools to do it. But Jim Jeffries, great stand-up comedian, has a bit. I completely disagree with him on his conclusion, but he has this awesome Second Amendment bit where he points out, like, because he's had his apartment broken into, he was tied up, and they were robbed and stuff like that, and people in America immediately go, see, if you had a gun, you could have stopped it. And he says, most people that break into your apartment, they just want your TV. And you say that to a lot of Americans, and they look at you dumbfounded because they don't get what point you're trying to make. Because to a lot of Americans, somebody breaking in to take your TV is a killable offense under the guise of, I don't know what kind of threat you're going to pose to me. Well, maybe wait till they pose a threat, and if they genuinely pose a threat to you, then you've got a right in America to kill them. But that's not where it's at. Now it's you're guilty until proven innocent, and you're guilty of murder until proven innocent. Like, as soon as you see someone that you maybe kind of don't like, they're immediately trying to murder you, and it's okay to kill them. And that's really what Stand Your Ground is about. It's about not having a duty to flee before resulting to lethal force. And it's not only is it damning that we see that in our culture, but now you see cops doing it. That's what happened with Michael Brown, this big, scary kid. I'll concede, might have been a big, scary kid, was 20 feet away or whatever, 30 feet away from a police officer. The police officer shot him, and people defend the police officer by saying he could have felt like his life was threatened from 30 feet away because the kid was big. Like, no. If the kid poses a serious threat, he doesn't have to be armed. If he's up on the officer beating him, hey, I'm not going to like it, but I'm going to listen to the argument. That's just something we've got going on that's got to change.
On top of that, which I think is really interesting in the States, is, and not to paint everybody with the same brush, but sort of the, white conservative male, or like the hive mind of cable news, where we have these discussions about does someone deserve to get shot at X amount of times, like those insane conversations. But what I find really interesting is, in this case, why doesn't he go and call the cops? So I'm Canadian, and we always think that, you know, speaking in generalities, a lot of the world looks at America and goes, it's really bizarre. Your first thought is to John Wayne it. Like, your first thought is, there's a criminal in the front yard. I got to take care of this. We're all, like, on the phone immediately dialing up, you know, 911. And that, you know, this same thing. Call the cops come over. Why are you playing loud rap music? Make sure you're safe in your own home, and you're good to go. This guy runs out. Now, why does he do that? Well, a lot of the times, you know, it goes back to this idea of, you know, safety first in terms of I'm going to do it myself, which is really bizarre. And what I think is really funny is the same conservative media, or the same kind of like extreme media, we'll say, that makes arguments for folks like this, are on the flip side of the argument when it comes to Michael Brown. So on one hand, it's, well, you got to go out and meet the guy because you can't call the cops. And on the other hand, it's, well, you can't trust, you got to trust the cops. Why would this kid, look, it's a cop. Why are we even asking questions? A cop did it. Cops are so great. So they have this like double narrative all the time in these situations. On one hand, why don't you call the cops if they're so amazing? The cops that killed Michael Brown are amazing cops. Why shouldn't we just believe everything they say? And on the flip side here, you can't call the cops. He had to do it himself. So this is what I always think is really interesting, is trying to have it both ways all the time. The cops are so trustworthy and amazing, we can't have any problems with militarization of police. But then this guy's going out to shoot somebody. Why didn't he just call that same amazing police force that would take care of it? And all of these problems in America with militarization of police, which is creeping up to my country, and these situations cause these problems to just degenerate even further, because it creates a more paranoid society. It creates a society that feels they have to act. They can't trust the police. And so all of these things just feed back into each other into a terrible cycle of bad events like this one that could easily be prevented.
Yeah, I think that's a good place to leave it. Yeah, I'm reusing a graphic. Sue me. I can do that. Although we are having some technical difficulties with Jordan, who may or may not be caught in a tornado. Dedication, folks. Dedication.
We will do anything for ratings on TYT Community.
We're gonna have a live reporter from a tornado.
Jordan's gonna be like full on Twister with Helen Hunt driving down, getting us that footage.
Damn straight. That's how we do things. We do have Ebola next, obviously, but I want to give a minute for Jordan to get in here. So I just think it's, I mean, just to go back a little bit to our last segment, you know, I was really glad to see that there was some sort of justice, but there is a lot of injustice, you know, when it comes to, I mean, shootings and stuff like this, and gun culture feeds into it. What you were talking about, it's like Americans are very, I guess, individualist. I'm going to take care of this. You know, me and my trusty 44 mag or something like that. We're going to take care of this whole thing, and you know, don't you worry about it. You know, my castle, my home. Even if they're just going to try and steal your stereo, which sucks. Like, yeah, nobody wants to get their stereo stolen, but I don't know if that's an execution, you know, offense. Basically, it's not a capital crime, and I feel like a lot of people are treating that as if it is a capital crime. Like, oh, you come into my house, oh, you're gonna steal my TV, or you're gonna steal my stereo? Death sentence. It just seems like it's a really messed up priorities.
But how do you just
work with people?
how do you justify what I was saying, though? I'm just really curious, like, what your take on it, because this is where it goes back to me, where it sort of has to be racism in a lot of these cases, because as I said, like, I can't call the police. My first thought isn't to call the police. My first thought's to take care of it myself. But then Michael Brown was the cops. Why didn't he just it's this weird thing for me, this double sort of, double think in a weird way.
Well, it's a cognitive. I think it's a cognitive dissonance, really.
But you trust the police. Like, it seems to me it goes back to the race thing so many times. 'Cause it's like, it's just like a cafeteria trust issue. Like, well, sometimes we trust the police. The other times, why didn't you trust the police? Right. Unless they're playing rap music, and then.
Or we trust the police until they want more funding, because they're and they try to use the union to get more funding. It is bizarre the way. But like, we know right wingers are they're authoritarians essentially, right? So on the one hand, it's like, oh, respect the police, love the police, but hate the government. Well, wait a minute, you're an authoritarian, right? Because a lot of their principles are authoritarian. It's more of patriarchal, I guess. Like, I'm in charge of you. I tell you what to do, but don't worry, I believe in freedom. As long as you do what I tell you, freedom.
But so many of these people, these cases, it's like white privilege 101, and it bothers me so much, because it's like, these are the guys that don't have anything to worry about, that don't have to go outside their house with a gun, like, that don't have to do these kinds of, and it's that kind of man up John Wayne bullshit that really, I think, hurts all people who actually are on the pro-gun side of things. That, it's just like, you're all toddlers, we can't give you weapons. Like, I'm sorry, like, as long as these kind of things keep happening at such the rate that they do, it's a really hard argument to try to be like, there shouldn't be more regulation and control put on guns, because this stuff happens way too much.
It does happen way too much, and I don't think I think you'd have to be living in a completely different world to say that, well, it happens, to say that, no, this doesn't happen all the time. What are you talking about? But then again, you get into the old conservative argument of why aren't you focusing on the black on white crime and black on black crime, gun crime in Chicago? Gotcha, libs, with all the most tightest gun restrictions in the United States. Well, actually, they really don't. I think they repealed some of those laws in Chicago, so it's not the model of gun control. And even when it was, it didn't work, because once again, it's one place in an island of a sea. It's an island in a sea of guns.
And just to reiterate what Jordan was saying earlier, is it goes back to the idea of, when we're talking about these kinds of things, when we're talking about the sea of guns, or when we're talking about these specific situations, is that not only are they happening, but they're also happening when they have no really need to happen. And I think that's just going back to that sort of hive mind again, when you look at media, and like how there's always going to be somebody to take up that case, and things have gotten out of control. Things have just gotten to, like, the NRA's position on a lot of this stuff has just become so far out of the ballpark of insanity.
Arm toddlers and you won't have abortion.
Yeah, right. And I think that's sort of the silliness that's sort of becoming a disease that's actually infecting America, to the point of this kind of stuff happening. And I mean, like, this, like, as it's going back to the cable news bit, it's just, this was so obvious. Even like the kookiest of the kooks stayed away from it, trying to stand up for this guy.
But it's also what I said before, going back to the NRA point, is that what do they have left to do, right? They've already dominated the narrative. They've won the narrative.
It goes back to what we talked about, before the last time I was on your show, and various different, things I've talked about in the last 3 weeks with Gamergate and all of these things. It also goes back to that internet problem that keeps popping up, which is there's always some fact somewhere that someone can take out of context, and all of a sudden, there we have it. We're in a situation where, that we've got something out of context, so therefore our side's even with your side. Like, it came up with the Hope Solo thing. Why didn't the media cover that as much? And all of those kinds of things that, well, that's ridiculous. Here's the actual statistics on what's happening in society. So people have trouble understanding nuance, and people really have problems trying to understand the bigger picture, and the media never goes out of their way to paint that for them. They always focus on these little small issues and blow them up and try to talk to them and give each balanced weight when they don't deserve it. And so I think that all of these things are
small segments for clickbait.
Yeah, and
good small segments.
And then you combine that with an apathetic public who doesn't vote, and you start to have the fringes decide elections. And this is what's happening all over, the West, is that you're starting to get the average guy and woman just sort of like, oh, you guys all discuss me, I'm out to lunch. Like, I can't be bothered to get in the mud with you folks. But it just self-perpetuates that same thing. And then you give up your democracy to the people that can send money in envelopes and the people that have giant wallets. The people that donate care about guns, they care about the mushy middle, which is the rest of us, isn't going to send, Huckabee a check. Or we're not going to send Ted Cruz amnesty money to help fight Obama's,
illegal army.
Right.
To go and spread Ebola.
So how are you going to get money if you're a politician? And this is the problem that we have. So, one problem we take, you look at how many different ways we can connect the dots with all the other issues America's having right now.
Hey guys, so I'm back now.
Are you chasing tornadoes? That's what we wanted to know, because we had this vision of you and Helen Hunt in like a pickup.
Yeah, I definitely. It's wet here. It's bad. But anyway, so I have to jump back. I didn't get to make this point. I just want to point out the reason the guy went all John Wayne, as you said, and didn't call the cops is because if he'd called the cops, there would have been 3 or 4 dead black guys, or however many were in that car, not just one. So are we talking about Ebola now and budget cuts?
Yeah, we gotta head over.
All right, wait, hold on. Before we move to the next topic, we want this on the record so you can't sue us later. Are you okay, Jordan? Is there any chance that you might get swept up by a tornado and be in the Wizard of Oz by the end of the show?
Go home and find a cellar.
Yeah, we just want to point out we know you signed that contract before the show, but you really can go home.
I am contractually obligated to die on air tonight, so that's what's going to go down.
Oh, we gave you the Simon Cowell contract.
Hey man, I'm just here to help Jeff's ratings, and I figured if I die live on air, this channel is going to blow up.
If Upworthy can't title the hell out of this, they can't do anything properly.
Bingo.
We'll even have I'll even make a sidebar for it. Up.
Nice. Man, let it happen. Let's do this thing.
Okay. So finally we get to move on to more depressing news. Ebola. Yay. It's a fun show, guys. You know it is. With Americans continuing to freak out about the one Ebola case found in Texas, thousands of people in West Africa are actually dying from the disease. As of today, it's estimated that 3,000 people have been killed and over 6,000 people have fallen ill from Ebola. Now, you think this would be a great time for sending over some aid to help prevent a further spread of Ebola. Well, that's what our government would like to do, except that the government agencies tasked with doing that can't. Well, why can't they? The sequester. You guys remember the sequester, don't you? Where Congress essentially failed miserably to come up with a plan to fund the government, so instead, automatic budget cuts were instituted. First by cutting the Pentagon, and then going over and cutting social programs for the poor, as if they're going to cut something that actually matters. Yes, that's sequester. Now, according to Anthony Fauci of the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases, the sequester has had, quote, a significant impact on us. It has both in an acute and a chronic, insidious way eroded our ability to respond in the way that I and my colleagues would like to see us be able to respond to these emerging threats. And in my institute particularly, that's responsible for responding on the dime to an emerging infectious disease threat, this is particularly damaging. Makes a lot of sense. Now, the CDC's director of the National Center for Emerging and Zoonotic Infectious Diseases, Dr. Beth Bell, testified before a committee to get more funding to fight Ebola in West Africa. Well, why? Well, they've already seen a $13 million budget cut from the sequester. Now, that's actually kind of a drop in the bucket, because if you really look at the numbers, you would need an estimated, and this is in order to help get the Ebola crisis under control, not eradicate it, just to get it controlled and contained. And these are estimates. The UN estimates that it would take over $600 million just to contain the Ebola crisis. They cut that much, just about that much, actually more, out of the U.S. aid program and the global health programs, which probably could have stopped the spread a little bit earlier. On that, Bell says, quote, if even modest efforts have been made to build a public health infrastructure in West Africa previously, the current Ebola epidemic could have been detected earlier and it could have been identified and contained. This Ebola epidemic shows that any vulnerability could have widespread impact if not stopped at the source. So, what do I have to say? Well, I have to say congratulations, Congress. Perhaps if you had put the damn meat cleaver away from the budget, you might have been able to stop Ebola before it got too large. And another point that I want to point out is that this time, you can't pin this one on Obama. This one's on you. Congratulations.
Well, you sort of can pin it on Obama because the administration came up with the sequestration idea as a
last resort, because they thought that it would actually work through.
Not as a last resort, as a thing that was supposed to be so horrible it would never happen. Like, they put this horrible option out there and said, all right, this will make you do something, and Congress still didn't do anything. So, like, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying it's Obama's fault. I'm not thanks Obamaing this. I'm just pointing out, like, sequestration was kind of Obama's. That's where it came from. But obviously it was not that he thought it was a good idea. It's that he thought it was so bad that Congress would never let it happen, and he severely overestimated Congress. Go figure. Obama doesn't get Congress or how to work it. But yeah, man. I mean, what else can you say? The free market will fix this. We'll stop shopping at Ebola. I mean, you got to have some government spending here. It's ridiculous. We've had multiple Ebola outbreaks in the past. They've never gotten this bad. It's not a coincidence that this happens at a time when we're cutting foreign aid left and right.
Dan, go ahead. What do you think?
You know, it's funny because we're sitting here and it just devolves into the same thing that you want it to, turn into, which is what's complaining about Congress and then or Obama, and that it's just, this is a cycle that somehow we have to figure out how to get out of, and this network, as well as my show and everybody else, is equally responsible for it, by pointing out how dumb some of these people are that we elect. But it's got to be better government, because every time we get into these debates, we just pinata these folks. Well, that's great, except that government's the answer to some of these problems. And I think what we've ended up with is people don't get the nuanced argument between bad government, and government has now just become synonymous with bad. And so this is a great example, as Jordan said, is something, this is what you need, to stop shopping at Ebola, or that Ebola was kind of made me laugh. There is no solution to this, except sometimes we have to throw government that's the only thing that's big enough to actually handle $600 million problems. And we need to handle those because it affects the daily lives of people. And of course, the great sort of irony of this week is that all of the deaths that are caused by Ebola, which is the one military freakout, And then the 9,000 from the UN report that happened in a civil war with ISIL. What number do we care about, right? It's like now we really care about those dead people over there, but in Africa, the dead people, that's different. Well, because it doesn't affect us somehow. Well, actually it does. Here comes somebody overseas. And then this is that kind of, where you almost the self-parodying of the West, where you this selfish sort of nature of when we choose to care about which number of deaths and when your death becomes important to us, when it might affect me, and and how we even talk about these problems. So yeah, I mean, it's not shocking when everybody hates the government that you're going to end up in a situation where, oh, guess what? We're going to cut this. Good, we like cutting. Cutting is good across the board. We all agree cutting is good. Government has too much money. Government equals bad. What about disease? Oh, well, whatever. What about ISIL 9,000 dead? Oh, well, we must go overseas and spend billions and billions of dollars. Where's that money coming from? We'll talk about it later. Terrorism. So it's just this bizarre sort of media cycle, and it's funny that we don't ever have the conversations at the same time, especially right now when they're happening at the same time. You know where the money's going? To that other news story you're about to throw to. So that's my take on this.
No, I think you make a good point on that one. We've only when it benefits us do we do something, and right now bombing ISIS is the only benefit. Why? Because we're spending defense contractor money over there, weapons, and using them. And then the defense contractors get paid and the politicians get paid. But when people are dying of Ebola, nobody gets paid. They don't want to touch it.
Yeah, let me jump in. Let me jump in and make a little point building on what you and Jeff just said. I wasn't going to go here because I thought it might be too off topic, but it's a small show tonight, so I'll go a little off topic. This is something I've said in the past, and Jeff reiterated it tonight. This is libertarianism, Scientology versus pragmatic progressivism. People don't draw the difference between government and bad government. Government is synonymous with bad government. And if Sean were here, he's very quick, and rightly so, to point out, hey, every time we spend money to train rebels, those rebels turn around and kill us, 10 years later. But here's one thing that doesn't do that. Whenever we spend money and have foreign intervention of a humanitarian nature. Bill Clinton came and spoke at my college whenever I was there, and he told about the big, the Malaysian, the big tidal tsunami that hit back in what year was that, guys? Was it 04 or was it after that? Anyway, early mid 2000s, we had that big tsunami that hit, he told the story about one of the things that they had kids do to kind of process that and get over the grieving was he had them draw pictures. And as he was telling the story, I saw my Old Testament theology professor lean over and whisper something to his wife. And come to find out, what he was saying to his wife was what Bill Clinton was about to say, because Dr. Hayes had a background in engineering, so he was over there doing relief work. Helping to clear out the flood places, so that the disease wouldn't spread and stuff like that. And what the kids did as they got more healthy or whatever, as they got better and kind of got over it and went through the process, is they eventually started drawing American military helicopters, because we were flying the missions to pull people out of the water and save them, and that's what stuck with the kids. And he told a story, he kind of told us in class the next day, to kind of build on what President Clinton had said. He had somebody from the area, one of the locals there, come up to him and he said, when I turn on my TV and I see American military in Iraq, I think those are bad men. But then I see those same people flying helicopters and saving my family, and I think, what? Those are good men. And this is a situation where having, isolation is wrong, but there's a difference in good intervention and bad intervention. And we're so quick, man. It's so easy to convince us to go bomb ISIS, but it's so hard to convince us to go stop Ebola, and that's ridiculous. Not only is that bad values, but it's bad policy, and the data bears it out.
And to just add on to that, what since the tsunami was an interesting kind of marker, and so was the crisis in Haiti, as something that I noticed that when we started to Kickstarter as countries, basically, how much do we care about insert country here? We'll match what you guys give us, which of course is insane in a couple of ways. One, that's our money that you're matching it with. So yeah, and two is that used to be kind of a pillar of the world. You would bail out the poorer countries, like if somebody had a flood or a tsunami. Now it's kind of like, let's just sit back and see how much the public gives a damn, and we'll figure out how much we give for aid then. And that's a really dangerous trend that's happening. And this goes back to, once again, when you go to Iraq and you go, hey, fuck the UN lies, they're not on our side, and we start poisoning these agencies that, we're going to have to rebuild anyway. Like, the world needs these things, whether or not you think they're not as effective as they could be, whether or not you don't think the government's effective because of money. Yeah, okay, great, but to just say, shrug, I'm going to, be an internet libertarian and get really upset about stuff, that's not helping the actual problem. And so that's where I really wish people would engage more with their government, and as Jordan said, like, it makes so much more sense as policy.
All right. Good points, everybody. I think we've spent enough time with the depressing half of the show. So now we're going to make fun of people. Pinata time. You like pinata time, right, Dan?
It is my favorite time.
There you go. Pinata time. So who are we going to make fun of today? This time it's not who, but it's what. You will be entertained, or at least you'll be like, what the fuck? The GOP is trying to reach out to a demographic that they don't quite understand, and frankly, who does, right? It's women. Yes, women. They're trying to reach out to women. Apparently, they didn't do too well with women the last couple of elections. They decided to make an appeal to them with this really odd mashup of politics and reality TV. We have a clip. I'd like to show that.
Budget is a big deal for me now that I just graduated from college. The Rick Scott is perfect. Rick Scott is becoming a trusted brand. He has new ideas that don't break your budget.
But Mom has other ideas.
I like the Charlie Crisp. It's expensive and a little outdated, but I know best.
And don't forget, the Charlie Crisp comes with additional costs. There's over $2 billion in taxes, $3.6 billion in debt, and 15% tuition increases.
But I'll be paying this off for the rest of my life.
We cannot let her walk out of the voting booth like that.
Mom, this is my decision. And I see a better future with Rick Scott.
Sometimes it's hard to let go of old styles, but it all worked out in the end because Britain said yes to Rick Scott.
The fuck did I just watch? Seriously. Okay, so let's get away a little bit from the style of the ad and get to a little bit of the substance. So obviously if I'm trying to understand this right, the ugly dress was characterized by things like $2 billion in taxes and $3.6 billion in debt and a 15% tuition increase, which is it sounds terrible, right? And what it doesn't mention, and why would it? It's a fucking ad. Is that Scott, basically Rick Scott, has allowed privatization and private companies like Duke Energy to basically charge whatever the fuck they want to the taxpayers for things that he didn't deliver. Well, that's kind of shitty, right? Voter restrictions with voter ID, harder to win claims for medical malpractice, cut taxes on corporations, and watered them down to zero. Pretty much the less taxes that they pay, the more you pay. That's essentially Florida's trickle down. And not only that, but they take federal money to. He refused to take federal money to people who need it. But hey, go ahead and just play with your dresses, Rick. I think this really seems like a really bad attempted outreach. It doesn't say anything like, oh, Scott's got new ideas. Really? What new ideas? Nothing. Oh, look, pretty dress. Terrible ad, terrible outreach. And this is an example of what has happened to dumb down political ad spend. And this is just one of the most ridiculous ads I've ever seen. Dan?
You know what's more depressing than this ad is the fact that my first reaction to this ad was, this isn't that bad. Like, that's how low my bar is now for the political process. I'm like, it was like the dumbest thing. What does this even? I expected, I remember a day and age, because I'm 31. I remember a day and age when, Mike Judge's Idiocracy seemed like a satire, and that's how old I am. Now it's a documentary, and I literally, when I saw the headline of like, Gawker said something along the lines of like too dumb for words, or like, so I honestly expected like people just drooling into cake. And so when I saw there was actual words and production behind this video, I was like, oh. Every time I come on Jeff's show, I write another chapter in my really unpopular, non-best-selling book, It's All Our Fault. This sort of goes into that, I would say, the appendix of that book, which is, this is how dumb we are. Like, this, I'm sorry, you ask the average person about things, and they are literally like, I watch Say Yes to the Dress. It's not a male thing, it's not a female thing. It is legitimately the public at large needs this kind of pablum. I really, and that's what's really sad about it, is that how are you going to get people's attention nowadays? You can live in filter bubbles. You can live on Netflix. Most people I know have cut the cord. So there is no cable TV coming into you. So you have to seek out news, because you're not going to, it's not 1965 where it's like all of a sudden at 6 o'clock all four networks go to Cronkite and company. So now that everybody's on the internet and live in a filter bubble, how are you supposed to reach out to people? How do you get them? This is idiotic, we all agree, but so's the electorate. The more you know.
The whole thing is just, is absolutely ridiculous. And look, this is even being named one of the most sexist ads of the season so far. Like, there's more campaign season to go. It seems like it's almost always campaign season, though, to be honest with you. But this, this is essentially saying that, hey, hey, voter, pretty dresses, go. Vote for Rick Scott. And look, this isn't the only one that they did that with. They did this with all the Republican governors. They reshot the same commercial 4 different times with just insert different governor's name, with nothing changed.
And it is funny how they always do these ads for a demographic. So we're assuming this is aimed more at women than men. And I mean, like, as if that's the problem. As if it was, your commercials didn't appeal to the television that I watch enough. Perhaps it was your actual policies that don't think I have control of my own body, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, the other point, before Jordan's back, I think I see now, the other point to hammer home is just Rick Scott's an idiot. He's such a tool. I mean, this is the guy who recently, in the spring of this year, went to an old folks home and talked to them about how Obamacare was terrible, and then ended up with a 45-minute session of how great Obamacare was. They picked one of the places that had chock full of Democrats. What are you talking about? This is great. He's the guy who bragged to the media about his service in the military. He was docked in the 70s. He didn't go anywhere. He went to Bermuda, I think, in Puerto Rico. And what was his big claim for military service when he tried to open up, by the way, the Military Hall of Fame? He also decided that his big claim to service was they stopped selling pop on the ships he was at and soda. So he bought Coca-Cola, Pepsi, and 7-Up and charged his fellow soldiers double. See, he's an entrepreneur, the Rick Scott. So, I mean, just these guys, so painful. Not surprising that this ad either A, could convince you to vote for a person like that if you don't care about the rest of the stuff, or B, that he would greenlight it.
Jordan, do you have anything you want to add to this?
Nothing substantial. I'm curious. Because this is one of those things where, like, I don't think that men get offended by stereotypes, because our stereotypes aren't really as belittling, I guess you could say. But just, I guess, so it's hard to draw an analogy, but, like, let's say we live in a bizarro world where Republicans have a hard time getting the male vote. They do this ad. What show do they rip off to do the ad to get us?
I think it'd be more like a football game or something.
Yeah, like maybe what
Football
team drafts
related,
you or something like that.
ball.
Which they've been doing all along, right? It's like that's the ad from the beginning of time. The guy in the hard hat, like getting off the construction job, having a rough time of it because of the damn Democrats. So like, this ad's sexist and douchebaggish. It's just, I guess my bar is so low. I'm not surprised.
No, I think Jeff's right. They'd probably do, like, some guys sitting around talking about who they hope drafted them or whatever, like, I hope Rick Scott drafts me, or I hope Chris Christie drafts Christie's offense was, or something like that.
They're going to make that ad now that you said it out loud.
Yeah, you're giving them ideas. So, hopefully your royalty checks will come in the mail soon.
Man, I could use those rules.
Oh yeah.
But then I'd have to split it with DNA.
Yeah, in this economy, I just realized that's what we should all be doing. If they're willing to buy that from an ad agency, Jesus Christ. Guys, we're missing our calling.
All right. Anyway, let's go on to Mike Huckabee. Mike Huckabee was speaking at the Value Voters Summit, and he thinks he's found the real reason that America is in trouble. Really? What is that reason? Well, we have this clip from the Value Voters Summit. I'd like to show you.
And I know there are many people who want to blame this current president, this administration, but may I say that part of the challenge that we face, the reason that we may be on the precipice of disaster in this country, is because when the phone rings in our hand, we aren't answering.
The precipice of disaster. Okay. So that's interesting. Someone isn't blaming Obama for a change. Wow. Okay, so whose fault is it, and what is it that he's trying to get at with the phone thing? Let's watch.
We're not in trouble because the phone isn't being answered in the agencies of government, but because when the call is coming to us from God,
oh, okay. You know what's funny? Apparently God and I might have something in common because I hate calling people and I hate leaving voicemail. Not to mention, I actually hate checking voicemail as well. Okay, so we have the problem. We're not answering the phone for God. So, Mike, what do we do about it? Well, he's got the answer.
some of you are frustrated and even upset and angry about America. I get it. Can I say to you that the answer is as simple as it is that we answer the phones in our hearts that God is ringing, and He's asking, will we register people to vote? Will we get them to the polls to vote? Will we hire the people that will take our values to this city? And will we fire the ones who refuse to hear not only our hearts, but God's heart?
Moving. Absolutely stirring, Mike. You know what I don't understand is why God wouldn't just rig an election. He's God. He should be able to pull off voter fraud, at least, right? But seriously, though, fire everyone that doesn't believe the way that you do. Essentially what he's trying to say. Okay, got it. That's your plan. That's your mindset. What this is, and why this bothers me, is this is essentially a campaign speech wrapped up in a sermon. The mixing in of religion and politics that is so infused into the right wing of today. Now, I don't know whether to say hallelujah or write a campaign check after this speech. Hell, I might as well do both. Hey, and maybe while we're at it, we can just pass the collection plate across from church and then send it right to the fucking RNC. It really is, to me, disturbing, the level of religiosity inherent now in our politics, especially in a main party, and especially since we're supposed to be a secular nation. Jordan, I imagine that you are also probably upset.
I am, but I'm upset at what he actually said. So I want to point out this has been reported by liberal rags of Huckabee trying to argue that we should establish a religious test for all. That's not what he's saying. What he's saying is the same thing that you and I and Dan say every. Saying elect people who share your values. And now for Huckabee, one of those important values is what religious system you identify with. And we'll get more into where he's wrong about that. But that's what he's saying here. He's not trying to argue for a official state religion or a test, or to literally go in and give pink slips to like the secretary if she's not a Christian. What he's saying is elect people who are Christians. Like that's what he's trying to rile up voters to do. Yada yada yada. I still disagree with him about that. So like let's talk about what he said there though. Okay, so he says God's calling you. Are you going to answer? Now, I could get into that and go into the weeds there, but I get that this isn't a Christian show. You're not here for me to like teach a theological lesson, but I won't. But I do want to like keep talking enough about it to keep it relative here. And like this is where like Huckabee's and people like Huckabee, who I've already defended him a little bit. Let me defend him a little bit more. The man was a fantastic governor. Did a great job as governor of Arkansas. Since then, he's been a horrible human being. But like he's kind of like my family knows him from back in the day. Like it's hard for me to completely turn on Huckabee. But after stuff like this, I kind of have to, because there's just a point where you have to be honest and say, all right, dude, you're just bad, and that's where he's gone now. So like this is one thing that always like. Even whenever I was quote-unquote conservative, this kind of like, it struck me as weird. Like, conservatives argue against universal health care because they say, that's the state taking my money. Like, the church should be doing these things. Charities should be doing these things because if you do it through your taxes, then you're not changing people's hearts and you're taking money from people. And it's all this kind of stuff, and the government doesn't work. But then they turn around and they say the way God is going to change America and make America better is through the government. Like he says, are we answering God's call? Are we not? And he doesn't follow with, are you getting out there and self-sacrificing and serving and loving your neighbor and your enemy? No, are we registering people to vote? Because so these are the two competing ideologies in the religious right, and this massive cognitive dissonance that has to go on for every member of the religious right. The foundational pillars of the religious right is the government can't do anything right. Religion is the most important thing. You should push your religion through the government. So I mean, this thing that you value more than anything else, the way to spread it is through this thing that never works. And that's ridiculous. Again, I know you guys don't want me to go into, like, from a Christian perspective, why that's stupid. But from a logical perspective, from a governmental perspective, it doesn't make sense. It's just idiotic. And I just want to finally close. I've got to go into a little bit of theology. Like, the way Christ actually did, go about establishing the kingdom of God on earth, sacrifice, and refusing public office. So Mike Huckabee, who went from being a pastor to holding public office, that route is questionable at best from a Christian perspective as a way to set things right in the world.
Dan, you want to chime in?
So, okay, first up, Mike Huckabee, I believe, has a ringing in his ear. Whether or not that's God is a whole other topic. The second, I would like to suggest to God, if he's listening tonight, that perhaps he get on Ello, because I cut my landline a long time ago, and seriously, God, like, message me, DM me, Snapchat me. Because, you know, if you want me to vote for somebody, you got to get in there, because I'm not probably answering the phone. The second and third and fourth and fifth thing about all of this fun stuff is the idea of, listen, this is kind of like, it's fun to make fun of him, and but I totally agree with Jordan. How I saw this represented throughout the liberal blogosphere was ridiculous. He's not handing out pink slips to atheists. He's legitimately saying, I'm a cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs, and you should vote for those people too. It's like, this speech is in front of fellow cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs folks. So it's like he gave a family values speech in front of the Family Research Council. It's like giving a speech in denial to the NFL. It's like sort of expected. So it's not, it wasn't really that, surprising to me. Is this a huge problem in American politics, though? For sure. But as I've said on the show previously, I think a lot of this really comes down to the last throes of a losing culture, and a baby boomer to boot. Like, they're losing power, they're getting old, and I think for our generation, this is the stuff that's going to slowly, fade off into the distance. But I have a hope that younger Christians, even though I'm an atheist, that they will take more of Jordan's standpoint of things, and these guys, the old Huckabees, all the way down to the sliding scale of Pat Robertsons that are just completely off the rails. They're from a different time, they had a different value system, even though that value system was still better than their own, even in the 60s and 70s. But it is one of those things. I think this is the last kind of like squawking about it. He's still upset about gay marriage, but let's call a spade a spade. It prints money. It's a cottage industry that Mike Huckabee can always get a for sure check from, and all of these folks go around. It's no different than the old, going around to tents and medicine shows. It's the same thing, and you're never going to totally get rid of it. There's always going to be a place for these guys to line their pockets.
Well, and so your analysis of it from that side is absolutely right. But I want to kind of offer my own kind of speculation here about why the blogosphere is presenting it the way they are. Why these left-leaning publications are just blatantly misrepresenting a man who's already saying something so bad there's really no need to misrepresent it. And so one, obviously, it's for the clickbait, of course. That's the world we live in. They need money just like Huckabee needs money. So they say stuff that riles up their base. But the other thing is because if you're, a left-wing person, Huckabee is scary. And Cenk Uygur has even said this. I remember during the 2012 elections, I guess it was closer to 2011 he said this. He was absolutely right. I'll go a little further. Not only could Huckabee have beaten Obama if he had ran in 2012, he would have beaten Obama if he ran in 2012. Huckabee has not immaculate, but a really good record in Arkansas to fall back on. He really gins up the evangelical base of the right wing, but his policies are most of them he's certainly got some conservative policies. Everybody's going to start digging up stuff. But generally speaking, the man governed from the middle. The right side of the middle, but the middle. And he did a good job with the little state. And he's really affable. Like, he can come across as this likable guy, as hard as that is to believe whenever you see stuff like this. But, like, the dude is a threat, man. He's got this populist streak in him that he was probably the only person that could have beaten President Obama, and he didn't run. Now, since then, he's had, 3 or 4 more years of foot and mouth, TV show things. Like, I don't know that he's a threat anymore because he's been on Fox News too long. Like, there's too many sound bites, there's too much stuff to play that makes him, not really a legitimate candidate. I think he's okay with that because he makes a lot more money now than he would in office. But yeah, man, the left is rightfully so terrified of Mike Huckabee because he's the wild card on the right that could upset. I don't know if he could have upset Hillary, but he's the only one who could throw a real run for her money.
All right, I'm going to just quickly totally disagree with that. Mike Huckabee is way too honest to ever get anywhere far in national politics. I don't think he would ever make it, especially with the devout right-wing stuff. He would be a fundraising machine for the Democratic Party. You could just robocall all week from stuff he said in February. So I don't think that would ever work nationally. But I really actually want to take a quick second, because you hit on something that I think is really interesting, which is how did the liberal press, which might be the real, actually more interesting conversation from this pinata conversation, is this: atheism, said the atheist, online is becoming its weird own religion, and it really creeps me out. It's becoming its own belief system, and I don't mean that it's the same as does blah blah blah. I'm not saying that, but I'm saying it's got its own clickbait machine that exists. So you almost want to compare it to feminism. It's starting to get co-opted by internet publications because they know there's enough of a community there that it will go to these things. And I think media literacy is something that we really need to add into these conversations in our shows and just in general in the media, because I don't think people totally get how clickbait works or why this works, or financially why it makes sense to tent pole these kinds of groups, because they will for sure share it. And so you're seeing more and more of that content. And I think what's funny is that people think that it means more and more of these people exist, and it doesn't mean that. It just means that if there's a group of people that say, like Star Wars, the arts media will just pummel them with Star Wars, and they know that no matter what they put out, there will be a ton of clicks. It works the same for all these little miniature cottage industries, such as atheism, Christianity on the flip side. But atheists are becoming devout and angry, and they're getting upset about weird shit and getting really borderline Islamophobic, and so it's really problematic for people like me who are atheists going, what the hell? I'm like Jimmy Carter. He's a Christian. I liked him as a president. Wasn't around back then to vote for him. Wasn't alive on the planet, but I think that to make demonizing these people and to take their words out of context, it's so ironic, right? Why do we hate that religious guy? Well, gotta take him out of context. Wait, no, that's what we hate about the religious people. So yeah, it's so bizarre what we've entered into sometimes with the internet media age.
I think that's a good part to leave off. And then we're going to final story of the night, our final discussion, staying on the whole religious angle. We're going to talk about the decapitation virus, and actually something that you just hit on, Dan, the rampant Islamophobia. And this is a pretty good example of it. Brian Fisher wants to ban all Muslims from immigrating to America. And not because of Ebola, but because of something called the decapitation virus. Don't believe me? Check it out.
Now, we ought to be saying exactly the same thing about people who come from Muslim-majority countries, because we have no way of knowing who might be carrying the decapitation virus. We simply don't know. And so we say to them, look, I'm sorry we can't let you into our country. I don't believe that you represent a threat of any kind, but we simply don't know. We have no way to tell. We've got no kind of a scanning device that can identify whether the decapitation virus is in you, whether it's alive in you, whether it's going to erupt.
What's with conservatives and their wands and scanning devices scanning for Ebola and the decapitation? What the hell is with that? It's been a theme this week. But yes, You heard that right. Brian Fisher wants to ban 23% of the world's population from traveling and immigrating to America because he thinks they're pretty much going to start beheading everyone. So no immigration from Turkey, sorry, Jank. No immigration from Indonesia, Bangladesh, or India because, Muslims, majority Muslim nations. Now the funny thing about this that I want to throw into here is our supposedly greatest Middle Eastern ally. You know what that is? Apparently it's Saudi Arabia. Yes, Saudi Arabia. And they're all about beheadings. But apparently they're okay because they're keeping it in their own country. And just this year, Saudi Arabia has beheaded 41 people, 26 of them since August, on charges ranging from smuggling hashish, murder, and sorcery. Yes, sorcery. Now you balance that with Turkey on the other side, which is a majority Muslim nation. They don't even have a death penalty. Unlike America. Remember, we still kill people here in America. And sometimes we do a really poor job of it. But then you've got Turkey over there, no death penalty. Majority Muslim nation. They're not beheading anybody. But of course, it's not about that. It's not about the death penalty. This is about terrorism, right? Let's get back to the terrorism thing, because that's what Brian Fisher ultimately means. Muslims are terrorists. They're going to come over here and start decapitating people, right? So we should automatically be able to lock them out of the country. No immigration from any of these countries. I don't care, because we just don't know what you're capable of. We just don't know if you're going to kill people. So we're assuming you're going to kill people because you're a Muslim. It makes no fucking sense. Help me out, guys.
I don't know, what Brian Fisher's, personal stance is on science and medicine and stuff like that. But we're having fun with this story, so I'm just going to completely draw a comparison with no real evidence if this is something he's ever participated in. But how many of these right-wing guys, anti-medicine, anti-science, they're they'll point to supernatural, causes for epidemics and stuff like that. Actually, I think, didn't we do a story about Brian Fisher and the Ebola thing being a Christian, a way to turn the world Christian? Anyway, so they clearly have no understanding of how diseases and stuff actually spread, and they attribute it to non-natural causes or whatever. But then there's this thing that's not a disease, and it is driven by a religious ideology or whatever. And he attributes it to a virus. There's some irony there, right? I'm not the only one who sees that.
Dan, why don't you weigh in?
Guys, I'm just super happy that Andy Kaufman is still alive, because for a long time I worried he may have actually passed away. But no, he's got a show somewhere. It's amazing. We use this guy this is how dumb Brian Fisher is. We started out using Brian Fisher clips on our show and actually talking about them, and then it just got so insane. He ended up ranting at one point about Burger King had a rainbow wrapper for a Whopper, which he thought would indoctrinate thousands and millions of people to think gays were okay, and that for some reason he thinks about anal sex while eating food if it's wrapped in a rainbow. So listen, the man's got issues. But now we just literally run a segment of the show, and it's just wow, what a solid point. And it's a soundbite. It's impossible to even somehow even follow any of his logic these days. If it ever was possible. These guys are really just batshit crazy. But what I think is interesting is you saw this play out with Reza Aslan and the Bill Maher CNN clip that went viral around the internet, where Reza went after some of what Bill Maher thought. And I think that's an interesting, and where I get really disappointed, because you're feeding this Islamic, anti-Islamic, to not use the word Islamophobia for obvious reasons, but to this anti-Islam rhetoric, to get sort of passed down even through smart people that I enjoy like Maher, who, that's where the atheist thing I kind of leave the train, because you can't sort of dissect everything without getting into both A, the cultural, and then B, the individual, and then C, the geographical problems of the world. And that's where I think that it gets really dangerous in the day and age we live in, to not have more nuanced conversations. And even people who are comedians, I get you being like, all religions are stupid, and yes, this religion is dangerous, and we could have some sort of weird ivory tower, university discussion about, like, is Islam now in its current stage more, radical than Christianity in its current state? But if you took back to Christian during the, and insert this period, whether it's, going back to the Crusades or what have you, and have that. But what is the point of that in this day and age? Like, these statements on Islam, and these statements are always not as easy to grasp as a stupid Brian Fisher quote, but they're coming from a lot of smart people in more subtle and nuanced ways that are equally dangerous, because people buy into them and people rile up. And then when we have things like ISIL, when we have the Pamela Gellers of the world trying to plaster subway stations with anti-Islam bullshit, it feeds into that culture of fear. And this is why we end up in situations where people are ready as hell to get off their ass and go overseas to another war, because we create these imaginary monsters. And if you've met a Muslim person, odds are they're not carrying a magic virus with them.
You know what, Dan? Not only do we create imaginary monsters like Khorasan, we actually also create real monsters through interventionism, and that's a theme that we've hit on before, plenty of times. Before a lot of our Western interference, the Islamic world was not as bad as it was. Back when Islam was actually new, they were more into science and astronomy. They were the leaders of the scientific world at one point in time. So Islam hasn't always been this horrible, monstrous decapitation virus thing that we're making it out to be. But because of a lot of our Western intervention and colonialism and whatever, and not caring about sectarian violence, oh, look, the Sunni and Shia don't get along, they're the same religion, whatever. As Bush, was ignorant enough to ignore, essentially, stupid enough to ignore, to help inflame these sectarian tensions in Iraq, we've created this, a lot of this extremist Islamic extremism. And that's one of the big problems that a lot of atheists tend to ignore. Like, that's our bad. We kind of built that.
It also comes back to what I talked to you about the show about being, the difference between atheists that you meet who are reformed, born-again atheists like myself, who were raised Christian and had to come out of it, or whatever. That sounds really condescending. But my point is that I was Christian, raised Christian, now I'm an atheist. My point with that is that you have a different understanding of the cultural problems of that. So, like, there's a lot of things that come with the culture of religion, and you just wanting to be a good son, daughter, brother, sister, and and it's very much linked into what your family does. And I think that that's where Westboro Baptist Church is not as extremist. Terrorism is Islam. Wait, what? And these are the things that, like, you can be an atheist and not be an idiot at the same time. Like, you don't have being an atheist. No, it shouldn't be synonymous with asshole. But more and more, it's really driving me nuts. And it's coming from smart people like Richard Dawkins, and that it comes from that. I go back to that white privilege thing, where it's just. I know it sounds like an SEO word from a feminist blog to a lot of people, but there really is these examples of people who don't understand other parts of the world and just want to go kind of into these academic conversations of, like, let's compare how many Nobel Prize winners each religion has, which makes no sense. And that's what's really frustrating about it, is that we don't know these things. And a lot of the times there's places in the world, to come full circle tonight, guess what? It's poverty. It's these situations. Like, if you are really an atheist, much like I always say, if you're truly a Christian who wants to stop abortion, then start getting national daycare on the docket. Like, if you really are an atheist who wants people to maybe come away from religion, let's get some money to these folks, because guess what? I'm not preaching the gospel of cash. What I'm preaching is if you have poverty and you're destitute and you need something. And a lot of the cases is that, and a lot of these third worlds were bombing and this, that, and the other. Yeah, it makes people go the other way because they see you as an enemy and they gravitate towards the other thing. So it's hard to paint this conversation with a big brush, and it's hard to have these conversations in sound bites without getting into the nitty-gritty of everything. But yeah, like I just feel like people are doing atheism wrong, and they're doing the same thing Brian Fisher's doing, which is trying to like say ridiculous things because at some core level they think they're right, but just not.
All right, that it? That's all I got for you guys, everybody at home and for the panel here. So hopefully you guys have thought of some questions that you'd like to ask the panel.
Hey, Jeff.
In about 10 pounds. Yeah.
Can we maybe do this? Like take a short break for a few seconds. Like, I need to go step in the little boys' room, refill my drink, whatnot. Let folks get some questions out in the chat, and then come back and do Q&A.
If that's okay with everybody else, Dan, I'm sure you and I can chat.
I was gonna say we can monologue. We can fill. We can stretch for Jordan.
That we can. You're talking to two people who talk too much.
Yeah.
This is why we do this.
Shockingly enough, the guy who's going to do a 3-hour live stream on Sunday night can fill the 5 minutes you're in the bathroom.
We'd be a little worried if you couldn't, sir.
Well, this is going to, since we have the extra 5, let me expand on that. People, atheists especially, get very, very offended very quickly when you compare them to religion, and I understand their points of why we're not. Like we're not. There is no higher aim of an atheist. The atheist isn't trying to say to you, hey, don't X, Y, and Z because we believe in this. But the zeal in which they want people to convert and the nuance to ignore in arguments about religion and culture is a problem. And I think it's when I had that period too. Like I'm coming right out of school, right in the heyday of when atheism goes on the upswing because of the, equal and opposite reaction that always happens when the Bush administration gets involved and when the Christians take over the castle and you have a revolt from the other side. I got into that and I read Dawkins and I'm reading all these books that come out, whether it's Sam Harris or Chris Hitchens and there's a lot of points that are really good. And Mara, I love Religulous. Yep. But then there are these points where you start to get, in the last couple of years, where the same kind of like not thinking about the big picture, trying to get people to convert, which is basically to convert to nothing, but it's done with the same fervor that I remember growing up in Christianity with, which is like, you've got to. It's like, wait, whoa, relax. And everyone I know that actually did, lose their, religion or LRAM, like they didn't come out of it in that. They came out of it in a slow sort of way, and it became because a lot of the times most people had the ability to go to, say, world religions class in university or just read more books or got, like, a lot of the people I know that stopped being religious were people that really dove into their religion. And there's very few people that I've met like Jordan who have dove in and stayed there. So he always really interests me when we talk about theology and things, because I haven't met many people that have made it through Leviticus and figured out this text and that, and have come out the other side of it and go, yeah, I'm still there. It's just really, it's rare. It's not obviously super rare. That's why we have tons of biblical scholars who are still Christian and in Judaism, et cetera, et cetera. But it is an interesting thing to see somebody come at it like Jordan does. And as an atheist, if you want the honest truth of it, I have, as I entered my 30s and left my 20s, have become less adamant about that and more adamant about sort of promoting this the smart. I don't know if smarter is not the right word, but the more let's say who treat their religion with more depth and who understand the difference between the Mike Huckabee theology and the theology Christ. And whether you sort of get upset about that because you want everyone to just break out of religion, I do too, but I think that's sort of how it happens. And in the meantime, I think we all would agree that even amongst atheists that we dislike the Pope for X, Y, and Z, and for LGBT communities and everything like that. Religion is really dangerous, and the fight that the Catholic school system here in Ontario, where I am up in here in Canada, has done a lot of disservice to LGBT youth. Those are the things we want to switch over. But then the new Pope, wouldn't you rather have that guy than Ratzenberger Pope? Than the guy from Toy Story? So that's kind of where I'm at now as atheism. I'm like, we're not going to just get rid of religion off the planet. So let's try to meet people halfway. And when they go right off the, when they hold hands and fully Thelma and Louise off the Grand Canyon, then yes, my atheism cape comes out, and I get a little bit more, ardent about it when you're trying to teach creationism in schools. But up here in Canada, that's not happening. So, I mean, I think that also comes at it. The atheists, depending on where you are in the world and how much you have to deal with the 24/7 of religion.
Here's sort of my take for it. I grew up differently. I didn't grow up immersed in religion, so I never basically had a chance to break out of it the way that you did, and break out with the, oh, this is horrible, with the anti-theist sentiment. But at the same time, I'm quite anti-religion itself, but that's not to be confused with being anti-faith. I think that organized religion is everything that man touches, right, does have a tendency to fuck up, right? So you've got this man-made religion passing itself off as divine rule, divine right, and all that stuff. And that can be dangerous because that has power, it has control over people. Whereas faith doesn't. Faith is something that's personal between you and whatever deity or deities or whatever you wish to worship or not worship, right? And that's why I don't have a problem with faith, but I have a problem with organized religion. So like people who have faith, like Jordan, doesn't bother me whatsoever. I think it's great, it's fantastic. You have your faith, you follow it, excellent. But when it comes to the organized religions and the mega churches and everything like that, that's what bothers me. And that's why I do a lot of religion stories.
Well, I mean, we should point, like you say, my faith doesn't bother you. I mean, my faith is definitely not divorced from organized religion in any way, shape, form, or fashion.
But it can be. You don't need the church to tell you what to do. You have your faith in you.
This evolved, Jordan, from me saying my atheism from my early 20s to my atheism now, whereas in my early 20s I would probably want to go 20 rounds with you about religion, and now I'm actually happy that you're in your religion saying, hey, remember that part of the Bible about giving to others, and like, so that's sort of the difference now. I think that like I came from that too, and I fought the dinner table fights, and on the other side of it, am I in public sphere still going to go debate atheism and say, like, I'm an atheist? Yeah. But there's this atheist, there's just this atheist paranoia now that equals religion, that this is where, and I think that's why I'm speaking out against it, because it's kooky. Like, there's Canadians that believe that there's these new Christian organizations. We've done segments on it. I've pinata. They have no power. They're a small sect of the population. They get manipulated by the Conservative Party for checks and money, and they haven't got anything through Parliament, even close. And are some of these guys like Jason Kenney in my country, former severe cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs Christians? Yeah. And do they concern me if they jump into power? Sure. But you actually have to seriously take a step back and go, are these things really an issue? Or is this like the 80s blogosphere and that thing, like, just like everything else, hyping things up? And let's talk about real problems, and let's talk about, the idea of what does it matter at the end of the day? In certain cases, yes, does it stop critical thinking a lot of times? It sure does, but so does this like constant pursuit to reform the world. Like, no, let's meet people on real issues. Let's talk about, hey, if Jordan's religion helps him get to where I believe people should be in helping each other and helping the lower classes, and you know, if that's the Jesus that people follow down, then yeah. And if Jordan's sane religion tries to make it harder for LGBT youth to get, you know, better schooling or just their affect every day, then yeah, let's jump on them. But let's jump on them because that's the wrong thing. Let's not jump on them as team atheist world police. And that's, I think, what I'm trying to get at, is this organized atheism thing is becoming creepy.
Hey, speaking of creepy, just to lighten it up after that very insightful post from comment from Dan, I dug up this picture during the break that I thought I would share with everybody. Bam! Check that out, guys.
Also, by the way, in a tornado.
Yeah, both he and I have put on some weight since this picture.
Were you just out of prison in this photo? What's happening with this lovely orange ensemble that you're working?
That is my meeting president shirt. This was at the time, you know, whenever he was running for president back in the 08 cycle. And so, like, whenever I met Bill Clinton, whenever I met Huckabee, anytime I met somebody who was president or running for president, I wore this shirt.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Well, that's kind of neat. Jordan, you always have interesting. You just come out of all of these things so interesting. We learn something more about you every day.
Like Huckabee, Huckabee went to school where I went to school, Ouachita Baptist University. My mom was at school when he was at school there, so like that's how like they know each other and stuff. But and his daughters and stuff went there. Like the School of Education was actually renamed the Huckabee School of Education while I was there. And he came and spoke for this kind of new like scholars seminar thing that they put on there, and he came and talked about the importance of having art in the public education system, specifically music, but art in general. And then after he came, like a month or I guess the next semester, Clinton came because the president of OBU, Rex Horn, was Clinton's pastor in Little Rock. And so like a lot of like Clinton had like an exhibit in the Ouachita Library for a while. And so like it was a really cool time to be at OBU when I was there, because I got to meet like this guy who was running for president, this guy who was president. You know, like it was a really neat time.
Wow. I've definitely not met any president. So I'm sorry to let the panel down.
I've met no one important. Sad day for me.
Hey, you've met Jordan.
That makes you important by association.
Like 6 degrees of Jordan French. It'll be a new TYT game.
It'll be a new show.
All right, we've got questions, it looks like, right, Jen?
We do have some questions, so I'm going to ask a couple of those. I believe it was Tom that was asked, if Huckabee becomes president, do you think he'd work to get us to his rapture? I hope not. I'm not ready to be raptured, thank you.
I want a rapture to happen. Are you kidding me? That would be the greatest thing ever. We would have, you know how easy it'd be to get things through Congress if we had a rapture? People get left behind.
Yeah, but think about all the fake Christians out there. 99% of people would be left, and like Jordan would be gone.
Yeah, I know. I joke about that, but it's funny. I always used to say that when people talked about that.
Three people would like fly up.
You're right. Everybody that we dislike in Christianity would still be left on Earth if there really was a Jesus. if there was a God, every Christian we've ever spoken about would still be here with us.
Well, that's the funny thing about the rapture is like it's a completely made up thing. Like it's not in Christian scripture or Christian tradition anywhere. It doesn't show up until about 150 years ago, and it's an American phenomenon. And what's awesome about it is that like where it really took hold, and even to this day in the church. Now, like pop culture equates rapture with Christianity just because like the loudest segment of the church and the one that's most involved in the civic religion is the same segment that holds to the rapture. But like the funny thing about it is it's the same segment of the church that typically like wants to downplay the role of women in church, and also play the role of like miracles, and the term is cessationist in theological circles. And the rapture started with the concept of a rapture. Like its roots are a woman who had a vision. So it's these two things that these people believe like should be downplayed in the church or whatever, is where this big giant made up theology that they hold to comes from. It's pretty funny, but that's it's more of a Christian inside baseball rant there.
There is stuff though in Revelations and different parts, not to go deep inside, that does get into that feeds that idea that there will be a time when Jesus comes back, and
there's certainly the second coming is the great Christian hope.
Yeah.
The rapture is a completely new idea separated from that kind of draws itself from this one verse where it talks about in the time of Noah, two are in a field, one is taken up and one is left behind. The problem is in that verse, the one who's taken up or is taken away is taken in judgment. The one who's left is the one who gets the reward.
Because let me ask you this then, now we're really getting down to like all of a sudden we're having a Bible chat here, but what is your view then of what will Jesus do when he comes back? Like just hit a Chipotle, or what's happening with Jesus when he gets back here?
No, I mean I hold to a very traditional Orthodox view there. I mean I believe in the resurrection of the body and the second coming and the eternity after that. Like we in pop religion, Christianity is about like dying and going to heaven. In the Bible, what happens when you die is arguably never mentioned, and even if it is mentioned, it's really vague, and it's always in a parable and like this like allegorical story. What the Bible actually talks about, the great Christian hope, is the resurrection of the body at the Parousia, or the return of Christ. Parousia is just a fancy word for that. But yeah, I mean, I certainly believe in a big supernatural return of Christ, and a new heavens and new earth, and people living and not dying and all that stuff.
Zombies. People rising from the grave. Gonna have a zombie apocalypse.
Jeez, Jeff. Jordan and I are having a pretty good religious podcast there, and she interrupted with your crazy TMC views. You and your AMC.
Yeah.
Trying to capitalize off Jordan and I's beautiful conversation about what will happen when Jesus comes back and saves you.
No, to totally suck the levity out of the room, though, that's one big reason why I have such a problem with like guys like Huckabee. I've already laid out the logical problem with it, but like the religious problem I have with it, with them saying like God's answer, so go and elect Christians. Like no, the whole story of Scripture, specifically the book of Revelation, it hinges around one question. That question is, who is Lord, Christ, or Caesar? And the answer, of course, that Revelation says is Christ. And the image you get like of that within the context of the Gospels then is this idea that there's the kingdoms of the world and there's the kingdoms of God. And they're not necessarily opposed to one another, but they're different. They operate in different ways. And like for that reason, like I believe that Christians, at least at the national level, I've hinted at this in previous shows, like can't be politicians, because like whenever if a Christian becomes president, you almost certainly will have to make decisions that are inherently unchristian. Like I think war is directly opposed to the gospel in all instances, and I think Jesus is pretty clear about that. But if you're the president of the United States and your country gets invaded, like you got to order the army to defend your country. Like that's got to happen. And and there's verses in scriptures about like how governments have been entrusted with this power. To do what governments have to do, at least until the kingdom of heaven is established.
ISIS militants coming across the southern border to give you Ebola.
Yeah, and so like, hey, the Christian response to that is self-sacrifice. It's get out and love and serve your enemy. The problem is like, and the response, like the Christian response to when you see suffering, and you've got, like, is to give and to give your money to do all these helpful things and whatnot. But like, if the government mandates that, the world falls apart. Like if the government says, like we see the crisis is happening around the world, and the United States government taxes everybody at 100% to get enough money to go fix this stuff, then who's building the roads? Like you have to make unchristian decisions for a government to work. And so whenever you as a Christian come along and say, you know, like, hey, I want to run for president, like, not only then are you pledging allegiance to the flag and not to the cross, and ultimately, you know, to the flag that carries its power through the sword and not through self-sacrifice, but you're also saying, like, hey, this is the one that I think works better. This is the one that I truly put my faith in. And not only that, not only am I going to associate with this one and pledge allegiance to it, I'm going to be the man executing those decisions. Like, I'm going to be the one responsible for these unchristian decisions. And so, like, for that reason, I have a serious theological issue with what Huckabee said earlier in that clip.
And I think just to bookend that whole chat, though, it goes back to what I was trying to say in the beginning, which is, and that's why, as somebody who came from Christianity, I think it's important to differentiate sort of the Jimmy Carter from the George Bush. And the sequel is that I think that there are that level of Christianity of, like, yes, both have devout Christian beliefs. You could argue that over tea if you like, but the point is that there are points that we agree on, and people who are Christian, who truly, as I said, delve into their Christianity, know that there's a judgment at the end of the day. And it doesn't have anything to do with a court. It doesn't have anything to do with government. And I think that's the difference that I was trying to speak to, which is those Christians, even if they enter government, know that they're not supposed to be infallible, and there's large passages that are devoted specifically to telling you this, that you're not supposed to try, to be God. And I think it's not people who really. It's not always the people you think it is who are, like, crazy devout. It's actually the people that aren't devout at all that are really sometimes the issue. And as jokingly said, if the rapture ever was true, we would be left with the same talking heads. Like, if something magically lifted real Christians off the planet, all the people we talk about would still be here with us. That concludes our religious chat.
Indeed. Okay. Next question. There's two more questions, so we're going to get to this one. TYT Talk asks, is there a point in which the Western world stepped back from the Middle East? And he says ISIS, Gaza, etc. for his examples, and basically allow them to fight it out, regardless of factors like U.S. interests or death tolls. For our government, I don't think there's ever that point, because they got oil in them there sand dunes. And so that's always going to be a factor until we stop using it, or until they run out, or until it becomes too expensive, too toxic to drill there, or we find something else. There's not going to be that point now of where it will happen, but is there a point where it should happen? We are past that point. We were past that point probably back when we started interfering in the first place in that area. I think it goes back even before Iraq in 2003.
It goes back to World War I. I mean, it goes way back.
We can keep going back. Yeah, we can. That trail don't stop.
Yeah, and that's what I'm saying. Like, you have to go back a long, long ways to reach that point of where maybe we shouldn't have gotten involved, and maybe we should let the region sort itself out. Because when you allow that, and Haven and I, the last time she was on I believe it might have been the last time she was on the panel the time before, had a talk about letting countries come into their own without all of this intervention. I know it was more of a talk on the kinds of foreign aid that we give, like example for give to Egypt and we give to Israel, and other examples like that. But it's all that intervention isn't allowing these countries and these cultures to go into their own. They're always being bound by the puppet masters. We're always the people in the back trying to pull the strings of these countries and use that money in the foreign aid as the carrot and stick. You follow our interests, you do what we want, and you get the carrot. Here you go. And that, of course, just creates all sorts of different problems as well, because it's another form of interventionism that's not as blatant as invading another country to oust its, dictator, but it's almost as insidious and creates just as long as lasting consequences.
I think Jordan's point earlier sort of sums this up. If you really want the 30-second soundbite answer is this: will it happen? No. Why? It's not just the oil. It has a lot to do with the self-perpetuating cycle of violence that you create when you bomb something. So as we said just 5 seconds ago, the trail goes back far, far, far. Well, you know what? There's a trail that goes back to Iraq from the Saddam age, whether it was when you were friends with Saddam and then now you're not friends with Saddam, and then 10 years later you go back for...
It was a fiction. Iraq itself was created by the West. There's no such thing as Iraq. It's
well, yeah,
fake.
but before we get back to the times of Assyria and things, like it's just with recent history alone shows you that once you create an enemy by trying to fight another enemy, you create more enemies. So it never stops, and I think that the scary thing is I think because of the media that we have, because of the social media that exists now, the fear of snowball just gets worse. And so I think that's the real key to all of this, which is what you would need to stop something would be to a leader in power to say no. And you saw it sort of with Obama in the beginning, and then things went drone crazy. You saw it with Carter a little bit too, and both of those presidents were screamed at for being weak. And when you have the media we have, and you have that sort of thing, it's going to make it really hard for any politician to not go somewhere, because people want it, and that's the sad problem.
Jordan, do you have anything you want to add to this question?
Yeah, I don't know that there is a time that the West should sit back and let the Middle East sort it out. I don't know. I should say I don't know that there's a time that's going to happen, but I'm pretty certain that shouldn't happen. And what I mean by that is going back to my point that intervention does not necessarily mean war. The most successful thing we did in our war against communism was the Marshall Plan and the Berlin Airlift. Like, we followed up a war with an intense, ridiculous amount of government spending to the people that we had just bombed the crap out of. And so, like, this situation's different. We don't have clearly established lines here. So what you do, instead of saying, hey, so what we're all going to accept is that we've got to go kill ISIS, what we're going to argue about is how do we do that, right? Like, we don't want to put boots on the ground, but we'll do an airstrike. Like, no, like, maybe we need to not work backwards like that and say, maybe what we need to accept is that we will put boots on the ground, but what we can talk about then is what should those boots do? And what I mean by that is establish a hard and fast line. ISIS has already taken territory. Put a line up. Draw our lines like we used to have in a war. And if somebody wants to go on the offensive and take the fight to ISIS, then let the Arab neighbors in that region, in Turkey, do that. What we need to do, once we've established a line that our troops only fight if they're attacked on that line, is we build up that society behind that line and show them what treating women equally and providing education to everyone and merit-based society rather than class-based society, et cetera, all these things we supposedly believe in. What that divides whenever the government isn't Shia oppressing Sunni or Sunni oppressing Shia, but everyone in the area, whether they're Kurdish, Sunni, Shia, has the same quality of life, they are so much more likely to come together and fight ISIS or whatever common enemy it may be. And that's what we saw. That's what we saw with the Marshall Plan, and we can do something like that again.
Well, my question is, I believe we tried that already. Don't you think that there might be too much animosity, too much hatred built up for us specifically to be able to go in and do that?
When did we try that?
I believe we tried that in Afghanistan as well, and trying to rebuild Iraq.
No, we didn't try that in Afghanistan. We started Iraq. We propped up the government that created this particular crisis. We didn't do a good job of playing favorites. We also didn't do a good job of establishing quality of life for all citizens, regardless of race, ethnicity, religion, or gender.
Well, we really don't do a good job of that over there because we don't do a good job of that over here.
That's true too. That's true too. But man, like again, you look up the stats around the Berlin airlift and how much money and aid we dumped into that region, and what the quality of life of someone in East Berlin versus West Berlin was. And it's amazing how much we were willing to do for those people. And it was the single biggest deterrent to communism we had. Vietnam was a failure. The Berlin airlift, all these proxy wars we fought, failures. Failure after failures. We had all this, the spy stuff, failure. Foreign aid.
I'm not saying your plan wouldn't work, Jordan. I'm just saying that could we trust ourselves to be able to enact that plan again in this area?
It would be incredibly difficult, but the right thing is difficult sometimes.
It is.
But but the problem is this, like, and I'm not to go like to make this like as I said a McLuhan seminar or something, but it really does get back to, yeah, when you did that, you just didn't have the same media that you have now. It's just really hard in this day and age to do something measured. Like listen, I have tons of problems with Obama, and I wasn't even an Obama fan during 2008. It's just that Obama. You know, when you look at Democrats, and let me give you the outside of the bubble, you know, kind of look at from the rest of the world, is we were so glad Obama was in power during these small, you know, not small to them, but small to us, I guess, over here, altercations, like the atrocities in Syria, like what was happening in Russia. And every time the American press goes at it, it was Obama's too slow to react. Like, thinking is now a problem in politics. Like, thinking is a hurdle, which is really, really bizarre, but that's what's happened to the American political system. So it's like everybody else in the world is like, oh my God, thank God America's not like pushing the gas on this, because that keeps causing these giant meltdowns. So I don't think, whether or not it's the right thing to do, I can't envision a climate that a politician could sit for 2-3 months while like ISIS is happening right now, because we have no ability as a society to actually take a look at what's happening on our television screens and our internet and our iPads and step back and go, okay, in the big picture, this actually isn't as scary because the guy beheading a journalist is on my Facebook feed. And people are not equipped, in my opinion, from an educational standpoint. Even we don't deal with media hardly as much, not even close to, you know, the amount that we should be in marketing and explaining things, how you're sold, you know, in your daily life. And I think until that IQ of the average person in this specific area gets harder, you're never going to be able to have a leader that says, no, we're just going to wait this out.
Right.
Because you would just get beamed back images of more dead people, and then, why isn't he doing anything? Why isn't she doing anything? Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
I want to add on a little bit to that, and just say that, like, during the time of the Berlin airlift and the Marshall Plan, we were a different country. I mean, we didn't have a lot of the problems that we have today, and we didn't have the mindset that we had back then that we had today. Now it's much more difficult to be able to even have people rally around the same thing, to do something right for a change. The only things that we can seem to rally around somewhat is just to bomb another country, as opposed to helping another country. We're not the same America that we used to be, and we need to get back to our cultural values. And it just makes me think that we're not the right ones to do this anymore, because we're not in the right spot ourselves anymore. Yeah, sure, we have the money. Yeah, sure, we have the power. But do we have the right mindset? Do we have the right ability in our and I can't think of the right word, but do we have the right vision to make something long-term like that happen? And I don't think that right now we do. I don't think we have that right now.
And Jordan's right. The solution is using your wealth for good. Like, I know that sounds very like comic booky and ridiculous and simplistic, but it really is the truth. Yeah, it really is the truth. Like, you go down to Haiti and rebuild roads as opposed to overthrowing governments and things. Things would turn around for you in a big way. And there are places in the world that just don't, like, you just can't do anything as much. Like, and that's, I think, another problem of the media. And that's a good part of humanity, but a bad part of politics sometimes, is you see atrocity and you immediately want to to do something, because doing something feels better than doing nothing. But it's like the Saddam example I used from 2003. We could line up all the things Saddam Hussein did, and now you look at now. I'm not sure what's better. I'm somebody who's from Canada. We went to Afghanistan. I don't necessarily know where you were going with we kind of did that in Afghanistan, because I can tell you we didn't do that in Afghanistan, and we were doing what you told us to. So
nation building, I thought. Where did all that money go to?
But we never you never get around to nation building, though, because you're in a perpetual war. So, like, that's the problem. Like, we went as peacekeepers. Like, we never really had a real debate in Canada about to go to Afghanistan. We actually went on the heels of 9/11 as, okay, once America carpet bombs the place, we'll help everything get back on its feet because we're Canadians. And Blue Beret, yeah. And it never happened. And we ended up going to our first real full-fledged combat mission in many Canadians' lifetimes. And so it was really a culture shift here. We never signed on. Like, many people, if you would ask them back then what they were signing on for, I think it would have been a harder debate to have. And this is the debate now having in Canada, because America's kind of asking for the same similar kind of favor. Just come to Iraq for a little bit. And now Canadians are a little bit more like, whoa, Nelly, what are we getting ourselves into here? We didn't follow you into Iraq, but we kind of got hosed on Afghanistan. And you ask a lot of people who went to Afghanistan, is Afghanistan better than it was 10 years ago? That's another 10-hour debate. So the correct question, to the viewer that asked us that, the answer is we don't have optimism.
We are cynical, and perhaps we should be tested.
So yeah. So Jeff, what did you see some other questions here for us?
There was another question. This was about Ebola, and I think somebody might have touched on this. I think it was you, Dan. And it's TYT Talk again. Sends this in. He says the right argues that Ebola is part of Obama's Kenyan plot, while the left presents it as a laughable case of the sniffles. Both narratives, in his opinion, are wrong, but he wants to know which we think is the most, or does the most potential harm.
I think they're both right in a way. I think that the left is kind of right, and I'll explain why. I think Ebola is serious, but it's different when you have an infrastructure like the Western countries like America and Canada have. Like, that's the real key to this, which is sort of bizarre that the conversation goes to show you the selfishness sometimes of us. But we still really haven't had a conversation like we did earlier tonight, which was, hey, maybe more aid to these poor countries. And then all of a sudden when they have things like Ebola happen in like that, all of a sudden we get all concerned, right? And that's the real key to this. So, yeah, it is kind of a laughable thing in one case in Texas because you're America. Just like that, the aid worker that came back in New York and, hey, look, Ebola, done. Like that's sort of like, not to dismiss Ebola as being a terrible thing. We just have way better resources being rich countries over here to deal with it. So the outbreak isn't as a serious conversation. Now, are these viruses and things a serious problem if we don't really start, making better uses of our resources? Sure. But I think that's where the laughable thing comes in, because the right wants to make it that ISIS is carrying Ebola in on the back through the border, and there's one guy in Texas, and that's why it's funny. But don't take my word for it, because I was the guy that made fun of that ISIS sheriff before he even got on Fox News when he was on CNN. And I got hate for that. People are like, this is so serious. Why are you making fun of the guy who said I'm going to send him to hell? Like, what if ISIS did come here? So I'm not easily scared, I guess.
Well, although we should point out, so Dan's totally right. Ebola does not spread well in a developed world. It's not to say it's not a threat to a handful of people, and it's horrible when it happens. But and we do have to point out, I caught the tail end of the interview, so I don't know who it was. But this morning on NPR, maybe it was this afternoon, someone did point out it was, so America has the most expensive healthcare system in the world, and this guy came to a hospital at the beginning of the onset of his symptoms and got sent home. Like, we pay more for healthcare than anyone else, and we can't even catch Ebola. So, like, there's something to be said about, about the sharing of data, and again, just another, bullet point that our for-profit healthcare system is in drastic need to be caught up to the rest of the developed world there. But with that said, it's not so broken that it can't stop Ebola.
And also, it did kind of, like, as far as we can tell. Like, that's the other thing about this whole situation, is that, yeah, you know what? Human error is going to be a problem. I haven't read enough into it to know how deeply that the problem was systematic or how it was just like, oops, like he didn't have X, Y, and Z symptoms and we just messed up. But nevertheless, it seems to be under control. Like, I don't think this is going to spiral into an epidemic. So.
Well, and we have the infrastructure, we have the knowledge, we have the medicinal knowledge. Even though there's no cure to Ebola, we do know how to treat it so that most people that people who do come into contact with it, first of all, won't spread it and probably won't die from it either if you catch it early enough. So we have this luxury here in America of having all of these, this advanced medical infrastructure. And even though we, have the most expensive healthcare in the world, you could argue that, we do have one of the best healthcare systems in the world, so long as you can afford it.
But also, Jeff, just hold on for 1 second, just to clarify, when we talk infrastructure as well, keep in mind, we're not speaking of just that you have hospitals. The fact, let's be honest. Okay, Jeff and I had a funny issue before this damn show started. If you took Jeff and I's incomes in North America and Canada, I'm fairly sure we would be hovering in the pretty much damn poor rate. And we're doing a live stream right now. That's what I kind of mean too. Like, the term infrastructure meaning, like, we're in houses, there's social housing, there's things like, even the poorest of the I'm a fat poor person.
Right. There's no.
I look different in a third world. Yeah.
But yeah, by infrastructure we also mean that there's no dead bodies in the streets because there's nowhere to put them, which is what happens in Africa.
Right.
In West Africa right now, and that's a huge method of transmission. So I'm going to kind of borrow the saying from you, Dan. It is and it isn't. It's not the end of the world, but it's also not a sniffle. I think they're both right in a way. It's a sniffle here, whereas in West Africa, it's the end of the world. And that has a lot to do with socioeconomic factors, technology, and don't forget culture as well, because the culture is that they're ignorant about medicine as well. But their culture is not to trust anyone from the West at this point, because we've done too many things to fuck it up over there. And so they don't trust our medical professionals.
And I mean, that's a longer and more complicated conversation onto its own self. But I mean, I think that at the end of the day, like, there's no reason why we shouldn't be putting more resources into that area to, like, these sort of deaths are preventable, and it makes you kind of angry sitting here, as I said, being over here and not seeing that be where the money goes, as opposed to so many other things that we talked about tonight, which will be billions and billions and billions of dollars from Canada and America, and et cetera, et cetera.
Well, and it's not just a matter of putting, like, again, this goes to my Marshall Plan point from earlier. Like, that was not just spending a lot of money on foreign aid. Like, we did, to Jeff's counterpoint, we spent a lot of money on foreign aid in Afghanistan. We spent a lot of money in Iraq, but it was just this idea. Of course, we can get into what may or may not be conspiracy theories about whether or not that foreign aid was just to build up contractors that had connections to the people who started the war. But
that wouldn't be a stretch.
Right. Well, yeah. But the Marshall Plan was just that. It was a plan. Like, it was treated like an objective. Like, it was not just we're going to throw a decent amount of money at something, because when you do that, you don't fix the problems and you waste a ton of money, billions and billions of dollars. And then you do the same thing 10 years down the road because you didn't fix the problem, and that cycle just repeats itself. Like, So what we're saying whenever we're talking about like we need to be spending money in these places, I'm talking about like a painful, hard to pass bill resolution plan that you get real leaders to stand up and fight for and put together and treat these problems like problems to be solved, not ones that you throw a band-aid of money at. And that's the big problem with foreign aid over the past few decades.
And going back to the media situation, and that's the problem of the media we live in when people are specifically sectioned off for clickbait. And, you know, they're like, as I said, I did a segment today on Fox News' Ebola paranoia. And one of this more frightening segments was this segment where they decided to have this conversation about should aid be going over there. And there was somebody arguing for like the isolationism idea. And it's so bizarre because that's when we become isolation. The people are dying of a horrible disease, and we could put troops on the ground, and we could provide infrastructure, and then we could control an outbreak of a disease. No, what? Why would we put troops in harm's way? And you're going, like, it's just so bizarre how.
You could be like Donald Trump and say, "Well, you could send them, but they're not coming back."
Did he say? I didn't see that. Did he really say that?
I believe he said that.
He said that. He said that about the missionary doctors who are over there.
Oh,
Like,
yeah,
they have to move to Canada. We've got places in Saskatchewan that nobody inhabits. It's okay.
And you have healthcare, so you know.
Yeah, well, give that a couple of more years.
It might not be so bad. There's just lots of friendly people up there, decent beer. It's cold. In some places. I don't know.
Have you been to Canada?
I have not.
Wait, what?
I've not had the pleasure.
Dude,
Wait,
you live in Michigan.
Wait, what? Wait.
I know.
This just blew my mind. You have not been up to Canada.
When should I ever afford a trip to Canada?
You can hitchhike to Canada. We're friendly people. We'll take you in. It won't cost a lot. All right, that is my mission now. It's going to be Dan and Jeff's Canadian adventure.
Hashtag get Jeff to Canada.
Yeah. We'll send a car. We'll send a dog sled.
Once we're in Canada, we change it to hashtag get Dan and Jeff to LA.
Yeah, that's fair.
Get us to the TYT Network studios.
That's bizarre. It's so funny. It's like the old Lewis Black line about George W. Bush. Even drunk on a bet, you make it to Canada. That's crazy. I don't know. That was my question was the best question in this whole question period. Jeff has not been to Canada.
What's funny is that Tom lives the closest to me. He lives down in Flint. Lives probably like an hour away. And here's Tom saying in the comments, "You and me, Canada." Oh, that'd be a weird road trip. Interesting.
That's like me never having been to Missouri. Like, that's ridiculous. How have you not been to Canada, dude?
I don't travel.
This is the difference between a Canadian and American. I'm close to Michigan, being in Ontario as well, and I'm a Red Wings fan. that's the difference of like. That's how much I care about your state. I actually cheer for one of your sports teams.
So Dan, how many times have you been to Michigan?
A lot. Now, that being said, I will give Jeff this, is that since I entered the YouTube game and the arts life, I haven't been to a game or down there because it is just, it's expensive. But growing up, it was like, Canadians go down to the state, like that's the states to the people who are in my area of Canada, Ontario, in our province. It's either like New York State, Buffalo, New York, or New York City, because obviously, you know, Syracuse down that way, or Detroit, Michigan, is the other place. But my dad's a sports fan, so growing up, Detroit was like sort of the place where you would drive to go watch like NFL football or Buffalo Bills. We actually cheer for a lot up here in Canada too. So and now the Bills come to Toronto because we survived the 2008 crisis better.
So Dan made the best point on here is that since he started doing the YouTube work, money to anything. And
No.
that is why Patreon. That is why we do not beg for money for no reason. This is why.
Well, I have a confession. I've never been to Canada either, so.
Yeah, but that's different. You have an accent.
I have an accent. That's different. I have left the States. I've been to Mexico, but.
Yeah, I was gonna say the equivalent to you would almost be the other way.
Well, Mexico's still a good 2-day drive from Arkansas.
How long is Canada though?
2 days.
Yeah.
Like I've been to Bismarck, North Dakota is the farthest north I've been. But I went to Mexico on a mission trip one time.
Yeah, Bismarck's pretty close.
Yeah.
If you had made it to Minnesota, I would have said you'd been to Canada.
Close enough, right?
But like I don't have a passport though, so I couldn't have gotten to Canada, could I?
I know a guy.
Okay.
You're good.
I got a passport when I was a kid to go on that mission trip, but then it's expired or whatever. Now I've never had a need to renew it.
I wouldn't want to get pulled over by a Mountie though. Like, do they like put like a light on their reindeer or something?
Have you ever seen Michael Moore's only fictional film Canadian Bacon?
I have not.
So it's his only. It's his only
Michael
fictional.
Moore made Canadian Bacon?
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. So his only fictional film's about this idea of America's problem with needing an enemy constantly. So he made it right after the Soviet Union fell. So America decides like we need another enemy. So they invite the Soviet Union. They invite the Russian president now, obviously, over, and he says, "I don't want to renew the war." And Alan Alda's the president. He's like, "Come on, like the old time." So they create a fake war against Canada. And start creating fear against Canada. Anyways, why I brought this up is Dan Aykroyd plays a cop that pulls John Candy's the Buffalo sheriff, that actually, is kind of like the Joe the Plumber character that rises America up. And so they drive over to Canada and they spray paint on they get their van spray painted, and it's like Canada sucks because they're pretending to be Canadians. And so they get pulled over, and they're like, "Oh crap, our van's like covered in like fuck Canada, screw you Canada." And Dan Aykroyd says, "Guys, we've got 2 laws here, Yeah, you've got language laws. That signage has to be in French too." It's they get out and they spray paint Canada. It's good. Have a good day, guys. That's sort of that movie's the most Canadian movie I've ever watched, made by somebody from America. It's so funny. There's a part where they're running through a crowd of the Americans are pushing the Canadians down a hill to get somewhere, and as they push the Canadians, as the Canadians fall, they go, "Sorry, sorry about that." It's really funny.
That's pretty awesome. All right, yeah, so then Dan, let's turn it around. Like, have you ever been to the South?
I've only been down the Eastern Seaboard, so I've down to like South Carolina. And to Georgia, but I've never been to over to. I don't think we got to Arkansas.
The only place
I don't think we did. I mean, it's no, I don't think I ever did. I don't think I ever did.
I have actually been to the South.
Where have you been, Joe?
I have been in the dick of the United States, Florida.
Well,
I've been to Florida as well.
Well, that depends on what part of Florida you're in, because only half of Florida is the South. The other half is Miami.
And I was going to say, and I've been to, tourist Florida, so I've been to, Orlando.
Yeah, no, that's not the South.
I didn't go hang out with, the old-school Cubans or anything. I was with Mickey and Minnie.
Okay, so maybe I wasn't in the so-called south of Florida.
In Florida, the further north you go, the further south you get. Isn't that what Haven said the other day?
I think I was in the middle somewhere.
No, I like
the middle of things.
Virginia even was south for me.
Well, I mean, Virginia was the capital of the Confederacy, so.
Yeah, Virginia was very south.
Virginia, the Carolinas, that's old school South there. That's a very. We'll identify, as Southerners or whatever. There's a very real difference in Arkansas, Mississippi, Alabama, Tennessee, and Georgia, Carolinas, Virginia. There's 2 really different subsets.
We had Rebecca, who's on Truth Mashup from time to time, she had her family, her grandparents. Her grandfather was a doctor, and he moved down to Virginia to take care of people and got in trouble a little bit for performing operations for free on really poor people. They're like, what are you doing? And he's like, I'm Canadian. I'm sorry. It comes naturally. And but they were living at this place. It was like an old plantation, and it was like really, really creepy to them. And then they went out, and Beck's mom or Beck's aunt went out one day to do laundry, and a black woman came up to her and was like, "You're in the wrong laundromat." And Rebecca's, and this is like this is the 90s, by the way, just to clarify. And she's like, "Sorry, what?" And it wasn't by law anymore. It was just, it happened for so long that it was just like the white laundromat's down the street. And she's like, "Oh yeah, am I cool to be here still?" Like it was just, and then of course that became like the story, right? Like Canadians, that's just like, what? Huh? 1990, huh? Like, what's happening? Seriously? So yeah, so every time people ask us if we've gone to the South, this is how your stereotypes end up back up here.
And by the way, to everybody who is watching, this is sort of what we do after the show is over.
Yeah, this is the first time we broadcast.
Yeah.
This is the first time we broadcast our like hangout afterwards.
Yeah, this is the post game. If you want to watch the replay of this, you have to be a Patreon member for Jeff.
Yeah. Where we find out Jeff's travel schedule.
Today,
and we compare what brand of noodle is best to live off of for the week on a YouTube salary.
I'll go with creamy chicken ramen.
Becca got
cents.
Becca bought Kraft Dinner, and it was a special kind of cheese, which was really exciting. It wasn't real cheese, obviously. It was a special kind of chemical that tastes like cheese.
Special cheese.
Hey, before my battery dies, we need to have a showdown, you and I, Dan, on this printable or the whole.
And he's gone.
Oh, that's such a horrible cliffhanger. What were we supposed to talk about? I'm not going to get to sleep now. That was ridiculous. That needs, like, you're just like a soundboard away from dun dun dun. Tune in next time.
I'm going to have to create the words, go into Photoshop and shop something up to be continued. To flash across the screen.
I hope that's not a tornado, because if those are his last words, I will feel so guilty.
Especially since you don't know what he was going to say.
Oh my God!
You don't drive anybody crazy.
Oh no! What were we supposed to talk about?
Oh my God, no!
I have to come back next week just to finish that conversation, guys.
Right?
Oh, what are you gonna do?
Yeah, this is what we do after the show.
Yeah, it's somehow crept into the show tonight.
Yeah, I decided to leave the damn thing up and just be like, whatever.
Oh right, we have an audience.
Have a conversation about nothing in front of our audience just because we entertained you for a couple of hours. Now we're just gonna bullshit. I just might be more entertaining than the show.
So somebody asked, do you like Degrassi? Okay, so you know a different Degrassi probably, but the original like Canadian CBC Degrassi was on even before I was really like with it as a kid. It was like an 80s thing, and so true story. The very first time I moved to Toronto for school, I moved across from this place where they shot Degrassi. I was like, and I was sitting outside my apartment. I'm like, building looks so familiar. Why is that like look so damn familiar?
For some reason, I thought like you said Degrassi, and I thought one, Neil deGrasse Tyson, and two, a Wheaties box. I don't know why, like where the Wheatie box comes from. Maybe
because in your nerd world, you wish people like Neil deGrasse Tyson were on Wheaties instead of Jaws.
Oh yeah, instead of Michael Jordan. That'd be badass.
Yeah, this Nobel Prize winners instead of somebody who can dunk. What a different world we would live in.
I know, right? Where actually you like had respect for people who were fucking smart instead of dumb. Like it seems like today in the culture we just worship people who would most likely drool on Windows.
You said it, I didn't.
It's true though. Honey Boo Boo, Kim Kardashian. Seriously, these are our role models, folks. Those are our role models.
So if we're being honest, if you ate a lot of Wheaties, Honey Boo Boo may not be the wrong person to put on that box.
From a money standpoint, maybe. I don't know. I don't think they're. I think their shows fizzled out, from what I hear.
As long
There's only
as
so much.
TLC made tons of money off of them, that's all that matters.
They made tons of money off her, and she didn't make pretty much anything. Because I don't think they made a whole lot from that show. I think it was just like pure exploitation. It's like tragedy porn, almost in a way.
Yeah, for sure.
The tragedy is they really probably didn't get paid for that.
I'm trying to look at all these Canadian comments now, but yeah, it's interesting. Like getting back to the Canadian thing, like that you haven't been to Canada. It's just when you were a kid, you never like. There's a weird thing. Like I used to work at the CN Tower, which is the focal point of Canadian baking, weirdly enough. And I would always bring that up to people, and people had never seen the movie, and I was like, son of a bitch! Like, am I the only person that saw this film? And so I worked there, and I got really excited because I heard like a mic noise, and I thought Jordan had come back from the cell phone dead to tell me like he was haunting me as a cell phone ghost. Like, this is what we were supposed to talk about. No such luck. So yeah, but Americans have zero knowledge about Canadians to the point where if you're an American watching this show, a guy basically made a comedian in Canada named Rick Mercer almost made an entire career off of these specials that were called Talking to Americans, where he would go down and ask Americans questions. Like he would sometimes ask them real questions they wouldn't know, but then he would also make up things. So he even asked George W. Bush about President Putin says hello, and George Bush is like, so, tell him I said hi. And so it's just like, yeah, so that's definitely the stereotype that like there was no way I would ever have been able to not get to Detroit or Michigan or Buffalo or New York State, but a lot of people that came to Toronto, and I meet them as American tourists, I've never been up here before. I'm like, okay, cool. Like, never thought to come. Like, all right, thanks. Like,
the last time that everybody was in Toronto, like that I would have had a chance to go to Toronto, is when Jank went up there for the for the screening of Matiselle, right? I wanted to go to that so fucking bad, just to be able to go and meet everybody.
Well, we both had that this year because I couldn't get to Netroots in Michigan.
Yeah,
so,
I couldn't either.
Yeah, so that was really rough. So I was like, because that's where I wanted to go in the States, but I don't have a passport right now.
I just didn't have the money for travel.
And as somebody's pointing out in the room, it used to be so easy to go to the States, and then they went all crazy with post 9/11 rules. But that even came later on, because in 2005, I flew to New York without a passport. So even then, they still hadn't brought it in yet in 2005.
I think you're passable, though. You're passable.
I'm fat enough to pass as a true born man. as long as I wear my TYT stuff or like some Red Wings jersey or something.
Yeah, they'll never know. You look just like one of us.
I had that with
that, and that's how you invade. That's how you will invade us and take us over. It's like the pod people.
Oh man, now I'm getting Canadian questions. This overtime's getting really interesting. So somebody asked, are you for Quebec becoming more sovereign from Canada as a whole? That's a really interesting question up here that sparks tons of debate. And if our Quebec Separatist Party hadn't basically jumped off the deep end and went full secular, basically, here's the 30-second Cliff's Notes on the Canadian separation. So they really came close in the 90s to separating. Like we had our Scotland moment in the mid-90s. And they just decided to stay. It was very, very close. The federal government didn't jump in to do anything. And we found out recently that in a new book by the journalist for the Toronto Star and the CBC, Chantal Hébert, she looked into it, and there was plans from different parts of Canada to consider going to America, becoming states. if Quebec had separated. So part of the East Coast was seriously considering joining, like Maine and what have you, and some of the prairies were considering jumping ship to the States, Saskatchewan specifically. So Canada was very close to falling apart because recently the separatists, when they lost that, the leader kind of went on a drunken rant about how he blamed the immigrants. Of course, that being because the immigrants have a favorable feeling of Canada and don't feel connected to the French language of Quebec. It's obviously not true. I don't know if that needs saying, but I'll say it anyway. So that separatist party has that serious problem with that. It borderlines on xenophobia a lot of times, and they went full crazy in the last couple of years trying to like ban religious wear, but like Christian stuff was okay. So they tried to ban like religious symbols and from all government employees, but then like somehow forgot the cross, kind of like it's just like insane. Right. So they got beat fairly handily in the last election in Quebec. So that's probably one of the big reasons why the separation that we've seen with Hong Kong and different things from Scotland up here hasn't really taken root, though they're trying to say it is. Quebec, for me, I don't want them separate at all because, first of all, I have no plans to move to live in Quebec. So I actually want my Canada to stay Canadian as a whole. And the big reason is, to be honest with you, selfishly, is they're pretty progressive in that province for the most part. They have, if forgetting the separatist racism, they're the ones who a lot of the times, because they have a lot of seats in Parliament, they have a lot of sway. And they're anti-war a lot of the times. They're the ones that like throw the brakes on a lot of the extracurricular activities that conservatives in the West and throughout Canada, for that matter, would like to get us into. They're way more supportive of our endeavors, aka the arts. So a lot of that stems from French language and wanting to protect their culture, but it does sort of trickle down effectively into English language culture as well. So yeah, they do a lot of, they've been the ones that have slammed the brakes on a lot of like right-leaning stuff. And my province of Ontario is a pretty big stick in the mud. They're, where Wall Street of Canada, Bay Street, is in my city, Toronto here. So we have a lot of fat cats who don't want to see things get better and want healthcare privatized. And out west, they've got the oil is like basically the only way that things are getting, the economy's moving. So oil's become Christ out here. So they're also kind of conservative. So Quebec's sort of important as for the left and progressives. A lot more progressive stuff. They had the big student strike. I don't know if anybody remembers that. Also, really, they also very important to basic all students across, in my opinion, North America, but specifically in our country as well. That got started there as well. So yeah. Anyways, point of that story to answer that question is no, I don't want them to separate at all. I want them to stay in Canada. Well, they also put NDP in power.
Mexico can take Texas back.
Right.
That's the problem that you see with so many, like, there are so many succession movements all over the world, essentially. We'd have hundreds more stupid little countries that probably couldn't do a whole lot of things, and after like 10 years, they'd probably try to come back.
Yeah, and there's all these funny things. Like I don't know if I can hear. Like it's different dialects in the States. People are making fun of the like a boot. So I can't hear that. I am the world's worst at detecting an accent, which is really bad. Vince works in casting as a part-time gig, and talks to me about how when American casting agents come up here, that's what they look like. They really listen. So Canadians really try to like hide their accents, right? So they can work in American productions. But I'm the worst. I have the worst Ontario accent. You'll hear it on the show sometimes. Like I'll say a boot, or
every once in a while.
Yeah, and when I interviewed Jank for the first time over Google Hangout, this is 2012, right around the election, he laughed at my house because I say house, and that's funny to him. Once again, I don't hear it, but apparently it said I say it Canadian-ish. But yeah, there's lots of those little things. When I went to New York, I had some girls laugh at me for they kept wanting me to say sorry because the Americans drop. At least in New York, they drop the. It's not ooh. It sounds like an Indian. It sounds like a garment. So it's like a sari. That's how they say sorry. There's no O in that word. And they're like, you say it funny. I'm like, no, I'm pronouncing the O that's in the word. So yeah, there's tons of these little dialects. Like I don't know if you have a Michigan accent, but apparently I'm hard on the sorry, hoos, a boot. What are you gonna do?
Well, people have told me that I have an accent, which I don't think I do. So
I don't have it as bad as some Canadians, depending on where you're from. But so there are some Ontarians that really do have that, like How I Met Your Mother cliche. James Vanderbeek doing some sort of weird Minnesotan that sounds Canadian. But that's a great Canadian joke too, right? When you guys do Canadian accents on SNL or something, we talk about that a lot up here and laugh because we're like, that's not what? Have you ever been to Canada? And what we found out tonight is you probably haven't.
Oh, the funniest thing is how South Park does Canada. I think is with the Terrence and Phillip and stuff with the how they animate them different with the heads that split. I don't know why, but I find that funny.
Sorry, what?
I was just talking about the South Park thing. How they animate the people supposedly from Canada.
Oh, right.
With the split head.
We are obsessed with Americans talking about Canada. Like, when Rob Ford went down, because I did a Rob Ford video on YouTube back in the day. It was like, I was actually doing an election special in Toronto. I've told you the story on your show before. But but that video maybe got like 25,000. And when Rob Ford's crack thing went up, I've never had a video from like 5 years ago. That video is like over 100 and something thousand now.
Damn.
125,000 views, and it's Rob Ford, and it's me. It sucks too because it's a segment that I did on my show that Rob Ford canceled at the last second on our show, which I told on your show before. So then I had to fill time. So we just ran to a studio and shot something really quick. So I have all these like negative comments, like this host sucks. And I'm kind of like, I do sort of suck at this clip. Fuck, like that. And I always want to tell.
This is my best work.
Yeah, I want to tell, and this is like the thing that really blew up for me in the last. And so I would get, but throughout Toronto, I will get like, are you that Rob Ford guy? And I always want to say like, no, I'm thinner. And they're like, no, from the internet. And so like that's sadly, I get. Standing on a subway platform in Toronto, hey, you're that Rob Ford guy from the internet. When I did Occupy, we were doing stuff on Occupy for Truth Matchup in its first incarnation. That's how the activists knew me. It's that Rob Ford guy.
Rob Ford guy, yeah.
Because I did a thing on television mocking him before mocking him became like a national pastime.
So Jordan is here.
Oh my God!
He had to say.
We talked long enough to actually get Jordan back on the show.
Oh, I'm gonna have to get going here because soon.
All right, yeah, we're gonna hit We're gonna hit the Dance Beer and Truth Mashup 3-hour mark here. So Jordan, what were you gonna say? It's gonna be.
It was a cliffhanger.
What do you and I have to talk about?
Well, it's probably not tonight because I'm home now where I'm on my satellite delay internet, but we do in the near future, while it's still relevant, have to talk about the new, was it for 12 million on AR-15 receivers? Like you and I need to go head to head on that one.
Guns. I was really hoping
that look of waiting, of longing to have that conversation on Dan's face.
I was hoping it was going to be like, something about Springsteen, or you were going to teach me that sexy accent so I could cover my Canadian one when I went to auditions.
We can do both those things in the same conversation.
That's probably true, actually. Yeah. All right, Jeff, is it your bedtime?
I got to get some food, actually. My wife brought me home food like 10, 20 minutes ago, and it's been sitting there taunting me.
All right, Jeff.
Kind of hungry.
You go get food, and the rest of us will stay here and set up a Patreon to get you to Canada.
Should I shut down the live stream though? Because we're still live.
Yeah, okay, we'll call it a night. Let's
All
not
right,
be Cinderella. All right.
All right, thanks everybody for joining us at home here on TYT Community. I hope you enjoyed the extended show and the bullshit chat at the end. Always lots of fun to have these chats and to actually have you watch one of these, because this is what we normally do. So, a lot of fun. Of course, I don't know if I have to throw out all the plugs and stuff. I think you guys already know by now. You know, the Facebook, Patreon, Twitter, subscribe, like the video, all that stuff. So, you know, I think I can skip the pleasantries, except for, of course, thanking Dan for joining us and directing you over to his show if you're not aware of that. Truth Mashup, Cynically Tested, youtube.com. Go and subscribe to him as well. Watch his show, his marathons on Sunday nights, where he goes for 3 hours. I don't know how you do it.
Recently we haven't been, so that show's probably going to go down a little bit in time because Google does not like our 3-hour chat.
Google is a angry mistress. She does not like people using her stream. That sounds dirty. That sounds wrong. I need to get some food. All right. So thank you for everybody for coming out. Thanks for watching, and stay tuned next week. We're off tomorrow. I got some stuff I have to handle. So we'll be back on next Thursday and do more news and politics stories. So make sure to join us 8 o'clock after TYT Live. And you guys have a great weekend. We'll see you next week.
Good night. God bless.
Farewell.